How a dying pup saved a family. Grief had a smell-damp wood smoke, stale coffee, pages of an unfinished thesis filling every corner of the Vance cabin after Nathan's fatal fall. His widow, Nora, measured days in silent cups. His daughter, Lena, traced ghost patterns on porch boards. Then, on a dawn-painted bruise blue, a shadow parted the fog. Cale, Nathan's prized shepherd, long presumed lost. He padded forward with an impossible gentleness, laying a bleeding puppy at Lena's toes before retreating 3 paces, ears pinned, golden eyes begging. In that instant, Lena forgot the hush of mourning and felt something spark-hope, fragile as frost. Why bring the pup here? How had Cale survived months alone? Nora's scientific mind scrambled for logic, but the pounding in her chest whispered a simpler answer: because love remembers. Yet as she reached for the pup, Cale's gaze flicked to the tree line, and she saw 2 fresh boot prints where no ranger should be. Someone else had followed him, someone who wanted the past to stay buried. The dying pup whimpered, Cale growled low, and Nora realized healing this tiny life might be the only way to heal her own. But first, they'd have to outrun the darkness her husband died trying to expose. The cabin sat in the shadow of towering silver pines, its wooden frame worn by time, wind, and memories. Morning sunlight slanted through the canopy, casting fractured gold across the porch where Lena Vance, just 6 years old, sat with her knees hugged to her chest. The forest was waking birds, chattered unseen in the branches, and the sharp, comforting scent of pine needles and damp earth lingered in the air. But Lena didn't hear the birds today. She didn't feel the sunlight. Her world had shrunk to the soft creaking of the porch beneath her, and the weathered leather strap she held tightly in both hands, a bracelet, cracked and old, once worn by her father. Her thumb traced the faint imprint of his initials burned into the inside of the band, NV. She wore it like a shield, like it could bring him back, but it never did. 3 months had passed since Dr. Nathan Vance, animal behaviorist, police K-9 trainer, and the gentlest soul she had ever known vanished into the ridges west of the cabin during what was supposed to be a short survey hike. They told her it was a fall, a tragic accident. But Lena had watched her father move through the forest like it was part of him. He didn't trip, he didn't slip. He knew these woods. No, something had gone wrong. Something no one wanted to talk about. She hadn't spoken much since then. Not really. Words had stopped making sense. Only memory seemed to speak the truth. Like the memory of her father laughing as Cale, the enormous German shepherd he trained chase squirrels just to make her giggle, or the way his voice would soften when he whispered, "The dogs know, sweet pea. They always know." She believed him. Now, the wind stirred, just enough to ruffle the edge of her flannel nightshirt. She didn't move. She sat there, fingers gently rolling the bracelet between her palms, chin resting on her knees, heart heavy and eyes wide, staring not at anything in particular, but at something just beyond the edge of now. The forest was quiet in a way that made her throat tighten. She didn't know why yet. Inside, Nora Vance stood at the kitchen counter, absent-mindedly stirring a lukewarm cup of coffee. Her eyes were distant, locked not on the trees outside the window, but on the space between them. She could feel Lena's silence like a weight on her shoulders. The child had always been quiet, gentle, but since Nathan died, she had become almost ghostly. Nora tried to stay grounded. She believed in data, process, science. She had built a career as a bioecologist on observation and evidence. But none of her training prepared her for raising a daughter through grief, or for losing the man who had been the soul of their tiny family. She glanced out the window. Lena was still on the porch, unmoving, as always. Nora sighed and set the coffee aside, her fingers tightening around the ceramic mug. Back outside, Lena finally shifted her weight. Something in the wind changed, not just a sound, but a feeling, like a breath held too long, finally exhaled. Her eyes flicked toward the tree line. Nothing. But then, something moved. It wasn't the rustle of a bird or the soft step of a deer. It was heavier, slower, intentional. Lena sat up straighter, and then she saw it. At first, it was just shadow, a ripple between trees. Then 2 glowing amber eyes emerged, fixed on her. A huge figure padded silently from the brush, its fur rippling silver and black under the dappled light. Cale. She didn't breathe. Couldn't. She knew him. She knew that gait, that face, that presence. Her father's voice echoed in her memory, full of pride. "He's not just a dog, Lena. He's a partner. A mind sharper than most people I know." Cale had been gone since the day Nathan died, and now he was here. Not alone. Between his powerful jaws, carefully, gently, he carried something small, blood-matted dark fur. It dangled, limp too still. A puppy, another German shepherd, barely a few weeks old, by the size of it. Cale moved slowly, his breath fogging in the cool air. Lena didn't move. She didn't scream. Her hands clenched around the bracelet so tight her knuckles turned white, but her eyes never left his. Cale stepped onto the porch's edge, then stopped. With impossible care, he laid the injured pup on the weathered wood boards, just inches from Lena's bare feet. He looked at her, not past her, into her. His body tensed, not with threat, but urgency. "Please," something in his eyes said. "Please help him." Lena felt something move in her chest, something she hadn't felt in weeks. She shifted forward, slowly. Her voice came out a whisper. "Cale." He didn't respond, but his ears twitched. He didn't back away, either. Lena reached out with trembling fingers, not to Cale, but to the tiny bundle at her feet. The puppy's side rose and fell with shallow, ragged breaths. Blood was drying on its side, but it was alive. Barely. "Mom," she whispered, then louder, "Mom!" Inside the cabin, a mug shattered. Nora was already running. Cale stood motionless at the edge of the porch, his massive frame shadowed by the morning mist curling through the trees behind him. The air between him and Lena felt suspended in something deeper than silence, something ancient, instinctual. His amber eyes didn't blink. They were steady, sharp, and full of something far more human than any dog should carry. Time bent in that moment. Lena didn't scream, didn't flinch. She simply stared at the dog she had known so well, the one her father had trusted more than most people. Cale wasn't supposed to be here. The rangers had searched for him after Nathan's death days, combing the forest, calling, tracking footprints that vanished into rock. They said he had likely died in the same fall as Nathan. But Lena never believed it. And now, here he was. Not broken, not wild, not lost. Home. Cale stepped forward, careful and slow, his paws making no sound on the pine-dusted dirt. The puppy in his jaws gave no protest, too weak to whimper. Its fur was wet, matted with streaks of blood down its left flank. Its legs dangled limp like a doll, but its chest still rose in faint, fluttering rhythm. Lena felt her breath hitch in her throat. Cale's head dipped low as he approached, his gait controlled, almost reverent. He paused at the first porch step, then climbed it with the quiet certainty of an animal who knew he belonged. Lena leaned forward slowly, pressing her palm flat to the wood floor as if to steady the earth itself. Her heart pounded, but not from fear. It was something else, recognition. She didn't know how, but she knew this moment was important, sacred, almost. Cale stopped barely a foot from her. With deliberate gentleness, he lowered the pup onto the porch boards, then took 2 steps back. He sat on his haunches, muscles still taut but not threatening, his eyes never leaving Lena. A soft whine escaped from the pup. Lena blinked rapidly, willing herself not to cry. Her fingers hovered over the tiny body, unsure. Blood had dried in tangled streaks across its ribs and hind leg. One paw was twisted at a strange angle. She could see its side rise and fall, each breath shallow and stuttering. But it was alive. She looked up at Cale again. He stared back. There was no barking, no growl, no movement. Just an unspoken message passed between old leather and a little girl's green eyes. "Help him." The door behind her burst open. "Lena!" Nora's voice was sharp with panic. She stepped out barefoot, wearing a sweatshirt thrown hastily over her pajamas, her gaze darting from Lena to... She froze. Her breath caught in her throat as her eyes locked on Cale. "Oh my God," the scientist in her wanted to speak, to explain, to rationalize the impossible things she was seeing. But no words came. Because Cale didn't flinch, didn't bolt like a cornered wild animal. He just sat there, still and watching, as if waiting for permission. "Is that..." Nora swallowed. "Is that Kyle?" Lena didn't take her eyes off the pup. Her voice was quiet but certain. "It's him." Nora took a step closer, the wooden porch creaking under her foot. Cale's ears twitched. His shoulders stiffened, but he didn't move. What's going on? She reached for the towel she had brought, instinctively, wrapping it around the fragile body. The puppy let out a soft moan, but didn't resist. Cale shifted slightly, nostrils flaring, tail low but unmoving. He brought it, Lena whispered. Nora's hand froze. What? He brought the puppy. Lena said again, her voice fragile but fierce. Put it right in front of me. Like he wanted me to see it. Like he wanted us to help. Nora looked at her daughter, then at the dog, then back at the bleeding bundle in her arms. Wild animals didn't do this. Even trained dogs rarely acted this calmly outside of command. But Cale wasn't just a dog. Nathan had said it over and over. This one's different, he used to say. He understands things I can't explain. He chooses. Looking at Cale now calm, alert, and fully aware, Nora understood what Nathan had meant. This wasn't coincidence. This was choice. She rose, slowly, cradling the pup in the towel. Cale tensed slightly but didn't move. We're going to help him, she said gently. Not just to Lena, but to Cale too. I promise. Cale's ears tilted forward. His chest rose once, slowly. Then, as if he had received confirmation, he lowered his head and let out a low, gravelly sound that was neither threat nor warning. It was trust. A long, trembling breath escaped Nora's lips. She looked at Lena. Go inside. I need to call Dylan. Lena nodded, brushing a strand of red hair from her face, then looked back at Cale. She hesitated, then did something even her mother didn't expect. She reached out and touched Cale's face. Her small hand rested gently between his eyes, right on the narrow line of scar tissue just above his brow. Cale closed his eyes, just for a moment, and then he leaned forward and pressed his head, carefully, against her chest. Lena didn't move. She only whispered, You remembered. Nora Vance didn't remember walking back into the cabin. She didn't remember setting the injured puppy on the kitchen counter or grabbing the emergency medical kit she'd packed away after Nathan died. All she knew was that her hands were moving, fast but steady, and that the room had gone cold despite the fire still glowing in the hearth. Cale stood in the doorway like a silent sentinel, not stepping inside, but not retreating either. His head was low, ears twitching with each sound, his amber eyes fixed on Nora's every movement. It should have frightened her. Every textbook, every behavioral chart she had ever studied, told her that what she was witnessing should have been impossible. A working line German shepherd, reintroduced to the wild after months presumed dead, should have been either feral or broken, if not aggressive, at least unpredictable. But Cale was neither. He was calm, composed, and somehow waiting. Keep pressure here, Nora murmured, gently guiding Lena's hand over the folded towel on the pup's flank. Blood had soaked through in patches, but the flow was slowing. She didn't know yet how deep the wounds went, but they weren't clean, jagged tears that looked like teeth, not claws. That alone chilled her. Lena nodded, her green eyes wide but focused. Nora moved quickly, disinfecting the torn fur around the worst gash. The pup whimpered, its legs twitching weakly in protest. Cale let out a low, warning growl nod at Nora, but at the pain itself. As if angry that the world had dared to hurt this creature, Nora glanced up. Easy, she said quietly. I'm helping. Cale didn't blink, but the growl stopped. Outside, the forest had fallen eerily quiet, the kind of quiet that always came before something broke. Nora looked at Lena, brushing a trembling hand across her daughter's temple. Are you okay? Lena nodded slowly. He's scared. Not of us. Of something else. End quote. That made Nora pause. She studied her daughter's face. There was no fear there, no confusion, just a kind of stillness that children shouldn't wear so young, the same stillness Nathan had once worn when he believed he was being watched. Something flickered inside her. Doubt, maybe, or recognition. She stood and grabbed her phone from the counter. The line crackled twice before a voice answered, thick with sleep and static. Dylan Vance, came the gruff reply. Dylan, it's Nora. A pause, then rustling sheets. What's wrong? Is it Lena? Number. She's okay. We're okay. But I need you to get here now. Slow down. What's going on? It's Kale. Her voice caught. He's here, at the cabin. Silence. 2 thought he was. So did I, she said. But he's here, and he's brought something with him. A pup. Injured. I need you to come. Bring supplies. Bring your field kit. Another beat of silence. Then Dylan said softly, I'll be there in 20. Nora hung up, hand still clutching the phone long after the line went dead. She turned toward the living room, where Kale had finally moved. He now lay stretched out on the rug, his head resting between his paws, facing the kitchen. He looked tired. No, drained. His eyes followed Nora as she stepped closer, but there was no tension in his body. Only the kind of worn stillness she recognized from dogs who'd been through something their body hadn't caught up with yet. She crouched, slowly, her knees cracking against the hardwood. Why now? She whispered. Kale tilted his head, just slightly. Why didn't you come back sooner? Her voice broke without warning, and she hated herself for it. Why now, after all this time? What happened to him, Kale? The dog didn't respond. Of course he didn't. He was a dog. But still, something in his eyes flickered. Not animal. Aware. And it was that, not the growl, not the wound, not the blood that shook her most. An hour passed. They worked quietly, the silence broken only by soft whimpers from the pup and the occasional crackle of pine logs in the fireplace. The bleeding had stopped, but the pup's breathing was shallow, its heartbeat faint beneath the bandages, too small, too still. Lena hadn't left his side. Kale hadn't taken his eyes off her. Nora moved to the window and looked out into the trees. Nathan had stood there once, years ago, pointing into the forest and saying, "Wolves remember. Even after we forget them, they carry things we can't measure." Back then, she had smiled politely and gone back to her data sets. Now, she wasn't so sure he was wrong. She glanced down at Kale again. He wasn't here by accident. He had come back for a reason. And whatever it was, it had teeth. Headlights flashed in the distance, brief and white through the tree line. Nora stepped outside and waved. Dylan's truck rumbled up the gravel drive, the engine cutting off before the tires stopped rolling. He got out in boots and flannel, his ranger's badge half concealed under his coat. He didn't even reach the porch before Kale appeared. Dylan froze. "Oh my God," he breathed. Nora stood beside him. "I told you." Kale didn't growl, didn't move. He just watched them. "He's thinner," Dylan muttered. "Looks older, but it's him." Damn. Then he saw the blood-stained towel in Nora's arms. "What is that?" "A pup," Nora said. "Another shepherd. Bleeding. Bitten. He brought it to us." "To you?" "To Lena," she corrected. Set it at her feet. Saturday down. Waited. Dylan rubbed his mouth. "That doesn't make sense." "I know." "No," he said more firmly. "It really doesn't." Nora turned toward the cabin. "There's more. I found something in Nathan's old things." A note. Dylan followed her inside, glancing over his shoulder once. Kale hadn't moved. The note sat on the counter, the ink smudged but legible. "Cerberus is not a theory. If I disappear, follow Kale." Dylan read it twice, then slowly looked up. "You think Nathan knew?" "I don't think Kale just survived the woods," Nora said, voice flat. "I think he ran, and he ran from something." Dawn bled slowly through the treetops, casting thin beams of gold across the dew-streaked porch. Inside the cabin, the air still smelled of pine resin and old paper, the kind of smell that always reminded Dylan of Nathan. Not because Nathan had worn it, but because he belonged in it. Dylan stood at the edge of the living room, boots muddy, hat clenched between calloused hands. His eyes hadn't left Kale. The dog lay curled by the fireplace now, one eye half open, the other closed in exhaustion. He hadn't moved since the pup stopped whimpering, as though his duty had paused, not ended. "Jesus," Dylan muttered under his breath. "I never thought I'd see him again." "You and me both," Nora said quietly, wrapping a fresh blanket around Lena, who sat curled beside the injured pup. The child hadn't said much since the night before. She didn't have to. Her fingers never left the pup's fur. Dylan walked slowly toward the table, where Nora had laid out Kale's file. Military tags, Veterinary records, handwritten notes, Nathan's handwriting. Tight, angular, always underlined. Last confirmed sighting, Dylan murmured, reading aloud. Was at 8:47 p.m. the night Nathan. He stopped. His jaw tightened. The night Nathan died. Nora nodded. He vanished that same night. Base reports claimed he likely ran off after the accident. And they just closed the case? They said they found signs of a cliffside fall. No body, no blood. Just Nathan's field kit. And a collar not Cale's. A decoy. Dylan squinted. You think he staged it? I think someone did. Him? He leaned back in the chair, expression unreadable. Nora, you don't believe what Nathan believed, do you? About KL? The cognition theories? She didn't answer right away. Instead, she turned toward Cale. The dog lifted his head. Not much, just enough to meet her eyes. And in that moment, something passed between them. Unspoken, unprovable, but undeniably there. He didn't just find his way back, Dylan, she said softly. He found us. And he didn't come alone. Dylan crossed the room to the window, peering out into the mist-wrapped trees. The ranger in him, the pragmatic tracker who read scat trails and frost patterns like a second language, wanted to chalk this up to chance, instinct, a wild dog following an old scent. But Cale wasn't wild. He hadn't been for years, and this wasn't chance. You know what bugs me most? He said finally. Nora raised a brow. I've seen lost dogs. Hell, I've found over a dozen working K9S gone rogue after their handlers died. They come back messed up, half-starved, skittish, afraid of shadows. He pointed. That dog? Not messed up, not skittish. He's alert, aware, watching every damn movement in this house, but not reacting. That's discipline, not instinct. Nora stepped beside him. Then you believe me. I believe something isn't right. A long silence fell between them. Then Dylan reached for his radio. Dispatch. This is Chief Ranger Vance. Copy, Chief. Go ahead. I'm going to need drone recon over the south sector. Grid 9 to 12, and prep a wildlife team with trauma gear on standby. There was a pause. You expecting something, sir? I'm expecting the woods to talk, Dylan replied. And I want to be listening when they do. Later that morning, they moved the pup to a quiet corner of the cabin, wrapped in soft towels, IV drip rigged from Dylan's medkit. Its breathing had steadied, but it still hadn't opened its eyes. Cale refused to leave its side. At one point, Lena had leaned against him and whispered, Is he your baby? Cale didn't move, but the slow thump of his tail said enough. Dylan observed it all in silence, arms folded. Then he spoke. You remember what Nathan said the night before his last expedition? Nora turned. Which time? The last one. The one when he wouldn't shut up about Cerberus protocol. The words hung like frost in the air. She swallowed. He said he was onto something. A breach. He mentioned that Cale had started reacting to sounds before the humans could hear them. Reacting to emotions. Yeah, Dylan said. And you laughed. Told him it wasn't science. Just projection. I know, she whispered. But now, she didn't finish the thought. Because just then, Cale stood. Nora blinked. What is it? Cale walked to the door. Paused. Then barked once sharp, alert, not afraid. Nora opened the door. Nothing but morning light and mist. Dylan stepped out onto the porch, squinting toward the tree line. Then he saw it. A fresh set of tracks, large and deep, leading up the hill behind the cabin. Not animal. Boots. He crouched. These weren't here last night. How fresh? 4 hours, max. Nora's breath caught. They were watching. Cale growled low. Dylan stood. His hand instinctively hovered near the pistol holstered at his hip. Someone knew he was coming, Dylan said. Or followed him. And that pup, it's not just injured. It's a message. Inside, Lena stared at the pup. Then, at Cale. Her voice was barely a whisper. Is someone trying to hurt them? Cale stepped forward, placed his head against her shoulder. Nora watched scientist, mother, widow, as everything she once believed about animal instinct shattered in front of her. Dylan walked back in, jaw tight. This doesn't end here, he said. If Cale came back, he brought something with him. A trail, A reason. Nora looked at her daughter, then at the dog. I think it's time we find out who didn't want Nathan's work to be finished. The morning had thickened into a dull silver haze. Cloud light filtered through the trees, brushing the cabin in cool stillness, like the forest itself was holding its breath. Inside, time moved differently. Lena sat on the floor, back pressed against a stack of folded quilts, her hands resting gently atop the bundled pup. A soft fleece blanket wrapped around the tiny body, only the pup's fragile snout and one paw visible. Its ribs fluttered with each shallow breath. She hadn't named anything since her father died. But this one, this small, silent survivor who had appeared as if delivered by fate itself, had earned something more than sympathy. She whispered, "Your name is Ash." M. Her voice cracked around the edges of the word, half a breath, half a wish. Cale, who lay just outside the porch steps beneath the railing, lifted his head slightly. He didn't move forward. He hadn't all morning. But his eyes, dark, ancient, unreadable, stayed fixed on the cabin, on Ash, and on Lena. Nora crouched nearby, eyes darting between the monitor hooked to the makeshift 4 in her daughter's hands. The pup hadn't moved since the night before, until now. A twitch, barely more than a muscle shiver in the hind leg, but enough to stop Nora's breath mid-inhale. Lena felt it too. She didn't say anything, just leaned in closer. Another tremor. This time a paw flexed. Then a tiny gasp escaped the pup's throat, soft and high-pitched. A whimper. Not of fear, of awakening. Cale stood. It was subtle. He didn't bark, didn't whine, but his ears tipped forward. His body tensed as if every nerve in him recognized that sound. He took one step toward the porch, then stopped. Still too far to cross. Still unwilling to breach the invisible line between what he once knew and what he no longer trusts. Nora's eyes narrowed. "Lena, did you feel that?" Her daughter nodded slowly. He moved. Again, Lena gently stroked the back of Ash's neck. And then it happened. The pup's eyes fluttered, not fully open. Not yet, but aware. Then its nose twitched, drawn instinctively toward Lena's hand, as if scent alone was enough to calm it, to recognize her. Nora leaned closer, eyes scanning the pup's vitals, the slow pulse beneath the skin, the minimal reaction to light. "No way," she murmured. "That shouldn't be possible. He was nearly comatose." But Lena wasn't listening. She was watching Cale. The big shepherd hadn't taken his eyes off them. And Lena, without turning, whispered, "He wants to come in." Nora rose, walked to the screen door, and opened it halfway. Cale didn't move. "Come," she said gently. "It's okay." Cale lowered his head, but still, he stayed outside. The threshold between them something deeper than wood and air, something shaped by fear, by trauma, by memory too raw to step past. "You see this?" Nora said softly, now speaking as much to herself as to Dylan, who had returned with a new trauma kit. "He's not acting like a dog that lost a pack member. He's acting like a guardian. He doesn't need to see the pup. He already knows." And Dylan unpacked a sterile cloth and raised a brow. "Meaning?" "Meaning," she said slowly, "that somehow Cale brought Ash here not by accident but with intent, like he knew where to bring him, who to bring him to." Dylan glanced out at Cale. The shepherd was sitting now, tail curled around his legs, a silent sentinel just beyond reach. "You're saying he remembers us?" "I'm saying," Nora replied, "that he never forgot." Ash gave another whimper, louder this time, almost like a question. Cale stirred again, inching forward until his front paws touched the lowest step of the porch. Still, he did not climb, but his ears flicked toward Lena as she whispered, "It's okay, Ash. I'm here." Nora stood still, barely breathing. The pup's paw moved, just slightly, toward the voice, and then, as if drawn by a magnet unseen, its nose brushed against Lena's fingers. "What the hell?" Dylan muttered. "That's not normal imprinting, that's bonding," Nora finished. "But it's backwards." "What do you mean?" "She didn't raise him, she didn't feed him, she didn't touch him until last night. And yet," she crouched again. Ash, eyes still closed, was nestled tighter into Lena's hand as though it had always belonged there. And Cale let out a long, low exhale, as if releasing a burden he'd been carrying since the moment he vanished from Nathan's side. The air inside the cabin thickened with something beyond science, beyond biology. It was memory, not just of what had been lost, but of what had found its way back. Nora sat beside her daughter and slowly reached out, touching the edge of Cale's paw just outside the doorframe. He didn't flinch, didn't growl, just held her gaze. And in it, she saw something that chilled her more than any predator she'd ever studied in the field. Recognition. He remembered her. He remembered Nathan. He remembered why he was here. Outside, the wind picked up slightly, rustling pine needles across the trail Dylan had discovered earlier, the one with the boot prints. The one leading toward a truth no one wanted to say out loud yet. Lena leaned her head against the wall, eyes never leaving Ash. Her voice no louder than a breath. Did he bring him here to find us? Nora answered quietly, more to herself than to Lena. I think he brought him here because he already did. The shed hadn't been opened in nearly a year. Its door moaned as Dylan forced it back on rusted hinges, stirring up the stale scent of cedar, dust, and time. The morning sun angled through broken slats, casting long shadows over a forgotten world. Nora stood behind him, arms crossed tightly over her chest, jaw tense. I haven't stepped in here since the funeral, she said, voice flat. Couldn't bring myself to. Dylan didn't reply. He understood. More than she knew. The inside was just as Nathan left it, neat, meticulous, almost clinical. Wooden shelves lined with labeled boxes, a battered desk, old lanterns, and tucked against the back wall, the trunk, the one with the lock. Cale hadn't followed them. He remained at the edge of the clearing, eyes on the cabin on Ash and Lena like he'd been stationed there by something older than instinct. Nora glanced back toward him. He brought the pup here. That means he remembers Nathan. That means maybe this wasn't just survival. Maybe it was planned. Dylan knelt before the trunk, brushing aside a layer of grime. He always said Cale was different. Not just different, Nora murmured. He said Cale understood things we didn't. With a quick flick of a multi-tool, Dylan popped the trunk's lock. Inside, maps rolled and rubber-banded, corners curling with age, spiral-bound notebooks, a battered laptop with its charger still wrapped, and beneath it all, a small sealed envelope. Nora's fingers hovered over it. This isn't his handwriting. Dylan looked closer. It's printed, almost like it was left for someone. She opened it. Inside, one sentence typed in all caps. Cerberus is not a theory. If I disappear, follow Cale. Silence stretched between them. Even the birds outside seemed to fall mute for a moment, as if the name itself carried weight, too much weight. Nora blinked. He never told me this. Dylan exhaled slowly. He mentioned Cerberus to me once, in passing. Said it was a concept, some behavioral matrix tied to canine cognition. I thought he was just being. Nathan. You didn't believe him. He didn't answer. He didn't have to. They spread the maps across the workbench, careful not to tear the aging paper. Colored pins dotted wilderness sectors, red for predator zones, blue for seismic risk, green for unexplained anomalies. But one section had been circled 3 times in permanent marker. A ridge near Raven's Hollow. Nora tapped it. That's 10 miles north. No trails, no access roads. Dylan pulled out one of the notebooks, thick, heavily notated, margins filled with sketches of canine brain scans and behavior charts. Lines were underlined in red ink, erratic. Cerberus triggers not obedience, but preservation. Not training, programming, but it's biological deeper than commands. 3 layers: memory, emotion, direction. Cale's 3rd trial failed, but something happened. He chose instead. Nora stepped back, heart racing. These aren't just logs. They're warnings. Outside Kyle stirret. Not a bark, not a growl. Just the sound of his paw scratching once against the dirt like punctuation. Dylan noticed. He's listening. Or waiting, Nora added. She turned the laptop on. Battery dead. But Dylan had brought a backup supply. He plugged it in. The boot screen flickered, then revealed a locked interface. Encrypted. Custom. Nathan's signature. Nora sat down heavily. He didn't want this seen. No, Dylan said. He wanted it found. Big difference. He pulled a small drive from his back pocket. He gave me this a year before he died. Said if anything happened and it felt off, plug it in here. Nora stared at him. You never told me. You weren't ready, he said. And honestly, neither was I. He inserted the drive. The laptop screen blinked, then a message appeared. If you're reading this, Kale survived. Nora's breath caught. Then a video began to play. Grainy, time-stamped 3 months before Nathan's death. Nathan sat in the shed, his voice low, anxious. Cerberus was never about control. That's what they misunderstood. What they wanted was a weapon. What we accidentally made was a guardian. Kale isn't a dog anymore, not in the way they think. He remembers. He grieves. And most dangerous of all, he chooses. The screen glitched. If I'm gone, Nora Dillon, listen to me. Cerberus was the trigger. But what's coming next? KL is the key. Not to war, to truth. The video ended. The laptop powered down on its own. For a long moment, they sat in stillness, the air thick with something they couldn't name. Not yet. Dillon finally whispered, "What the hell was he part of?" Nora didn't answer. She stared at the words still echoing in her mind. Follow Kale. Not search the files. Not call the agency. Not trust the authorities. Just that. Follow him. Trust him. She rose, walking to the shed's doorway. Kale stood exactly where they'd left him. She met his eyes. Deep, ancient, unreadable. "Okay," she said quietly. "We follow you now." Kale blinked once, then turned his head north toward the circled ridge on the map, toward the place Nathan had feared and prepared for. The knock at the door was sharp, measured, like a code. Kale was already on his feet, standing at the window before the second knock landed. He didn't bark, just watched. Nora opened the door slowly, heart thudding. A tall man stood in the early morning fog, his olive green field jacket still bearing the faded outline of his military unit's insignia, though time and weather had tried to erase it. Silver streaked his temples, but his posture was still impossibly upright. A leather case hung from one shoulder, worn and heavy. "Doctor?" "Alejandro Ruiz," he said simply, voice like dry gravel. "You called?" Nora stepped back, barely concealing her emotion. "I didn't think you'd come." He looked past her, his eyes scanning the room with a soldier's discipline. "You said Nathan's dog came back, and that the pup's not right." "That's putting it mildly." Ash lay curled on a wool blanket near the fireplace. He was still fragile, his ribs barely padded with skin, but there was a quiet awareness in his eyes now, as if something had been reawakened. Lena sat cross-legged beside him, her hand resting lightly on his flank, fingers twitching every now and then as if afraid to lose contact. Kale stood nearby, watchful, ever the sentinel. Ruiz crouched slowly, his movements fluid. "You named him?" Lena looked up. "Ash." Ruiz gave a nod of approval. "Fitting. Strong things are born in fire." "Oh." He gently opened his case and removed a compact scanner and a thin glove wired with sensors. "May I?" Lena hesitated, then nodded. The examination was silent at first. Kale stayed still, though his muscles twitched when Ruiz touched the pup's back legs. Ruiz's brow furrowed. He glanced at Nora, then back at the dog. "Do you see something?" she asked. He didn't answer. Instead, he pulled a magnifier lens from his pocket and leaned in closer, then gently turned Ash's body to the side, exposing a line of fur that had grown in slightly darker than the rest, nearly invisible unless you were looking for it. A faint scar, seamless, too precise to be from an accident, too intentional. Ruiz reached for a small light wand and traced it slowly over the scar. The glow revealed another set of microabrasions, branching along Ash's flank, almost like incisions. Lena gasped softly. "What is that?" Ruiz didn't answer at first. Then calmly, "Someone operated on him, more than once." Nora stepped closer. "What do you mean? Like a surgery?" Ruiz nodded. "Yes, and no." He pointed to the pup's hind legs. Muscle tissue was bypassed with synthetic anchors, ligaments adjusted. "See this line?" He traced a faint ridge. "It's scar tissue, but not from injury. From insertion." "Insertion of what?" Dillon asked, his voice low. "Microfilament tracking. Possibly augmentation. Maybe more." Ruiz's jaw clenched. "But it's clean. No signs of infection. Whoever did this had access to advanced tools, and they knew exactly what they were doing." Nora backed up a step. "This doesn't make sense. He's just a pup." No, Ruiz said. He's not just anything. Kale moved, suddenly, stepping forward, body stiff. Ruiz didn't flinch. You remember me, don't you? Kale stopped. Then, slowly, lowered his body to the floor, not in submission, but in recognition. Ruiz's voice softened. Nathan showed me your training clips, back when you still trusted the system. Nora swallowed hard. You said you worked with Nathan? We were in the same experimental program, Ruiz said. I was medical oversight, back when the project was called Cerberus Genesis. Dylan's head snapped up. Wait, you're saying this pup is part of that? Ruiz didn't answer directly. He looked down at Ash. What they started with Kale, they refined in the next generation. Smaller, faster, more adaptive. He paused. But the ethics were questionable. Nathan tried to shut it down. That's when he disappeared. He didn't disappear, Nora whispered. He was found at the base of the gorge. They said it was an accident. Ruiz met her eyes. You believe that? The silence was damning. Ash whimpered then a soft, broken sound. Not of pain, of memory. Lena leaned closer. It's okay, she whispered. You're safe now. The pup pressed against her palm. Ruiz saw it, and something in his expression shifted. He's imprinting. What does that mean? Nora asked. Bonding beyond training. It's rare. He knelt again, gloved hand hovering just above Ash's skull. He's syncing with her emotional state. That's not behavioral. That's neurosympathetic. In English, please, Dylan muttered. Ruiz straightened. It means Nathan wasn't crazy. Kale was the prototype. But this one? He was engineered to feel. Amber. Kale gave a low, almost imperceptible grunt. Ruiz looked at him. You brought him here for a reason, didn't you? Kale held his gaze, then turned his head once again toward the north, toward the ridge, toward whatever was still waiting. Nora followed his line of sight. We need to know what Nathan was protecting, she said quietly. Before someone else comes looking for it. Ruiz slowly packed his case. Then you'll need more than maps. You'll need the truth. And you're going to give it to us? Dylan asked. Ruiz paused. Number I'm going to show you. As the sun crept higher behind the trees, the little cabin no longer felt safe. Ash was resting now, curled against Lena's legs. But something lingered in the room, an invisible weight, a timeline folding in on itself. Wounds no longer biological. Questions too big for a child to ask, and too late for the dead to answer. Outside, Kyle stood once more at the edge of the trees, unmoving, ears pointed north, waiting. Always waiting. The forest didn't whisper that morning. It listened. A hush had settled over the northern ridge, thick and uneasy, like even the wind knew something was about to surface. Dylan moved cautiously, bootfalls muffled against the moss-covered earth. Kale had led him part of the way, then stopped beneath a pine older than any structure left standing in the county. Without a sound, the shepherd had sat down, eyes fixed on the base of the trunk, and refused to move. Dylan took it from there. Fallen needles coated the ground in a dense mat. The tree roots curled like veins across the slope, gnarled and knotted. It took Dylan a minute to spot the telepatch of disturbed soil, just off-center, too uniform for an animal's digging. He knelt, hands brushing back the earth. His fingers struck metal. It was a collar. Black, military-grade webbing, weathered, scorched in places but intact, and unmistakably, Kale's WW. Dylan turned it over. The clasp was still secure, but the metal loop at the back had been fused, shut, melted slightly, as if exposed to intense heat. Embedded just behind the ID tag was a narrow seam, too small for a standard tracker. This wasn't for GPS. He tapped his radio. Nora, I found it. Kale's old collar. Something's embedded. Static cracked back. Then Nora's voice, tight with urgency. Bring it in. Emsel. Back at the cabin, Ruiz met him at the porch, gloves already on. They worked at the table in silence. Lena kept Ash wrapped in her arms near the fireplace, eyes flicking up every time someone raised their voice even slightly. Kale paced outside the cabin, ears twitching toward every movement. Ruiz held up the collar beneath a magnifier lamp. This seems intentional. There's a housing cavity inside. Dylan frowned. Tracker? More likely storage. Experimental microchips like this don't transmit. They record. Ruiz reached for a micro tool set and began carefully prying open the seam. Click. The side slid open. Inside, nested in a silicon sheath, was a wafer-thin chip. Ruiz placed it on a scanning tray hooked to his field laptop and watched as the system blinked to life. Lines of code scrolled across the screen. Then, read, "File corrupted." "Damn," Dylan muttered. "Can we still get something off it?" Ruiz was already typing. Depends how bad the corruption is. Sometimes the header data survives even if the body's scrambled. He ran a recovery subroutine. After a moment, audio crackled through the speakers, broken, distorted, like a transmission dragged up from underwater. Dylan leaned forward. That was his voice. Nora froze. "Nathan." Ruiz tapped a control, isolating the vocal frequencies. "It's degraded, but his voice print's distinct. That's him." More static. Then another line, clearer. "Cerberus Phase 3 begins." The words landed like glass breaking in the room. Lena's brows furrowed. "What's Cerberus?" Silence. Ruiz looked at Nora, then Dylan. "Yeah." It was the name of the original program, the one Kale was part of. Phase I was conditioning. Phase 2, augmentation. "And phase the third?" Dylan asked, voice low. Ruiz shook his head. "There wasn't supposed to be a phase 3. Nathan was adamant about shutting everything down after what he saw in the trials. Dogs with reflex loops that outpaced cognition. Emotional mimicry grafted into behavior. It stopped being science and became something else. Nora's voice dropped. "You think that pup, Ash, is phase 3? Ruiz didn't answer. He didn't have to. The audio kept playing fractured fragments stitched together by Ruiz's decryption tool. "They're not dogs anymore. They feel too much, too fast." KL resisted protocol, he remembered. And then, almost a whisper, laced with finality. "If I don't make it back, follow Kale." Dylan stepped back from the table, throat tight. "That collar's been buried since the night Nathan died," he said quietly. "Kale vanished that same night. No prints, no signs, just gone." Ruiz nodded. "Until now." Nora's hands clenched at her sides. "So what brought him back? What changed?" Kale, standing at the doorway, let out a low guttural breath, not a growl, but a sound of tension coiled tight, as if the answer was out there still, waiting. Ruiz carefully ejected the chip from the tray and sealed it in a lead pouch. "There may be more," he said. "If this collar carried a failsafe, Nathan might have hidden backups." "Where?" Nora asked. "Where he wouldn't even need to say it aloud," Dylan murmured, remembering the note from the shed. "Follow Kale." Ruiz looked toward the forest. "Then we follow him." "But we don't have time to chase shadows," Nora countered. "If phase 3 is real, someone else might be looking for the same answers, and they might not be as patient as Kale." Ruiz's face darkened. "Then we stay ahead. Whatever Ash is, he's the key, and someone out there already knows he survived." Lena looked down at the tiny shepherd in her lap. Ash twitched once in his sleep, then settled. His breathing was steady. But KL was still watching. Not her. Not the humans. Ash. As if guarding more than just a pup, as if protecting a fragment of something Nathan had buried deeper than any file. A piece of the truth. Or the beginning of something worse. The fire crackled low beneath the dark canopy, casting long, flickering shadows that danced across the faces of the four-seated figures. Pines circled the clearing like silent sentries. The air smelled of smoke, pine sap, and the metallic tinge of questions too long buried. Kale lay a few feet beyond the light, his body a still silhouette, eyes reflecting orange fire glow like twin embers. Ash slept nestled in Lena's coat beside her, the pup's breathing shallow but steady. Dylan tossed another log into the fire and looked over at Ruiz, who sat hunched forward, hands steepled between his knees. "So," Dylan said, voice low, "you knew about Cerberus?" Ruiz didn't answer immediately. He stared into the flames like they held a memory he hadn't let himself touch in years. "I knew the name," he said finally. "Knew what they said it was. But not what it really became." Nora leaned in. "What did they say?" "That it was behavioral enhancement," Ruiz replied. "High-level cognition. Emotional attunement. Designed to create K9S who could not only follow commands but anticipate moral intent." "Moral intent?" Dylan echoed, scoffing quietly. "We're talking about dogs, not philosophers." Ruiz didn't smile. "That's what made it dangerous. The flames cracked sharply. An owl hooted in the distance, but no one moved. Kale was one of them, Ruiz said. Prototype tier. Only a handful were cleared for full imprinting. Nathan handled Kale's conditioning. He didn't just train him, they were bonded at a level even the brass didn't predict. That's when things started getting unpredictable. Unpredictable how? Nora asked, eyes narrowing. He began resisting commands that would cause harm even in combat simulations. He hesitated in gray zone scenarios. Chose compassion. They thought it was a flaw in the imprinting model. Nathan thought it was proof the system worked. Ruiz paused, gaze hard. That's when he started asking questions. And that's when they stopped answering. Dylan stared at the fire. You think he found something? Something they didn't want him to? Ruiz nodded slowly. I think he did more than that. I think he tried to stop it. And I think Kale... He glanced toward the shadowy figure just outside the firelight. Knew exactly what Nathan uncovered. Why didn't he come back sooner? Lena's voice was soft but clear. Everyone turned. Lena looked down at Ash, still curled in her arms. Kyle could have returned after Nathan died. But he didn't. Not until now. No one answered right away. Then Ruiz said, maybe he was waiting, watching. Maybe he didn't trust anyone. Not until he found him. He motioned toward Ash. Or maybe something or someone forced his hand. Nora drew her coat tighter. The forest around them felt too still. I looked through Nathan's encrypted logs. Some were fragmented, but one phrase kept repeating, Phase 3 is not evolution, it's erasure. And what does that mean? Dylan asked. Ruiz rubbed his jaw. I think Phase 3 wasn't about making better dogs. It was about making something else entirely. Strip the empathy. Leave the precision. Dogs that don't hesitate, don't bond, don't question. He turned toward Kale, voice low. But Kale, he remembered. The fire crackled again, its light flaring briefly across Kale's features, and for the briefest moment, his eyes met Ruiz's. There was no growl, no warning, only recognition. Ruiz broke the silence. Cerberus was never official, off books, deniable. There's no record of it in public defense archives, but people in our field, they knew whispers. Funding flowed from shell foundations. No oversight. When Nathan tried to report anomalies, he got buried in red tape. He glanced at Nora. You ever wonder why a biologist like you got that grant to study cognition in canids up here? Why the files were already pre-approved? Nora blinked. Wait, you think I think you are a contingency, Ruiz said softly. A civilian with just enough clearance to validate results without seeing the machine behind it. They wanted to keep tabs. And now, he nodded toward the pup. The experiment is walking around again. Dylan exhaled. So what now? You think someone's still running this thing? Ruiz's eyes hardened. I think Cerberus never shut down. It just went quiet. Changed names. Changed locations. If Ash is part of Phase 3, someone will come looking. And not to rescue him. Nora's voice broke the hush. Then we don't let them find him. Everyone turned. Her face was pale but resolute, lit by firelight and fury. Nathan died protecting whatever truth he uncovered. Kale has been guarding it ever since. We owe it to them, to this pup, to see it through. Taces, 8, H, and of and O. There was a beat of silence. Then Dylan nodded. We start tomorrow. We retrace Nathan's old routes. Search for hidden caches, logs, anything that connects Kale's path to whatever he was following. Ruiz added, and we keep the pup safe, no matter what. As the fire dwindled to embers, Kale moved closer, still silent, but no longer hiding in shadow. He lay down at the edge of the circle, ears flicking toward every sound in the dark. Lena placed a gentle hand on Ash's tiny ribs, feeling the rise and fall. Then she looked up at Kale. You waited for us, she whispered. Now we won't let you wait alone. Kale didn't move, but his tail thumped once, slow and deliberate, in the pine needles behind him. It started as a low hum, a vibration more than a sound, crawling through the forest like a warning whispered beneath the trees. Kale lifted his head before anyone else noticed, ears twitching toward the northern sky. A moment later, he was on his feet, hackles raised. Nora felt the shift in the air before she understood what it meant. The birds had gone silent. The wind had stilled. Then she heard it, the deep thudding chop of rotor blades. A shadow passed across the snow-covered clearing. Not large, but deliberate, mechanical, controlled. Lena looked up from where she sat near the fireplace. Ash curled beside her. "Mom!" Dylan was already at the window, binoculars pressed to his face. Helicopter. Black. No visible insignia. Nora stepped beside him. "Military? Maybe," Dylan muttered. "But not any branch I recognize. No tail number, no markings, just matte black skin and thermal mufflers. This isn't news or park patrol." Kyle growled low, not in fear, but in warning. His stance was rigid, pointed toward the trees, like he could smell what the machine carried in its belly. The chopper hovered for just under 30 seconds, long enough to sweep the area once. Then it banked right, sharp and clean, and vanished behind the ridgeline. They stood in silence for a beat longer than necessary. Dylan finally spoke. "They weren't sightseeing." "No," Nora said. "They were scanning." She grabbed her coat and moved to the wall panel near the back exit. A quiet beep. Then a holographic overlay flickered across the screen. Her father's old perimeter sensors, motion, heat, and seismic still running. Still quietly logging every shift in the forest floor. She'd kept them online out of habit. Now, they were lit like a Christmas tree. "Zone 4, 7, and 12 just got tripped," she said tightly. "Sequentially, like someone testing the boundary." "3 zones on opposite sides of the cabin?" Dylan asked. "That's coordinated." Nora turned to him. "They're probing, trying to see how close they can get without triggering alarms." Kale padded to the door, sat squarely in front of it, and growled again, deeper this time. His eyes were fixed on something Nora and Dylan couldn't see. But Ash stirred too. A soft, uncertain whimper, the first since the night he'd been found. It wasn't fear. It was recognition, like something old was approaching. "Get Lena inside," Dylan said, already grabbing his rifle from the cabinet. Nora ushered her daughter to the reinforced storage room, not a panic room, but enough to buy time if they needed it. Kale didn't follow. He stood at the main door, unmoving, as though holding vigil. Ruiz joined them moments later, having been out near the ridge. His face was tight. "Saw the bird. No markings. That's Black Ops gear. Civilian airspace means nothing to them." "You recognize the model?" Dylan asked. "Closest match I know is Ghost Hawk spec. Custom frame. Low detection profile. That chopper could land within 50 feet of us and vanish in under 30 seconds. "Then why didn't it?" Nora asked. Ruiz looked toward Kale. "Because they weren't here for us. Not yet." The fire inside the cabin flickered against the windows. Outside, night was falling fast, and the temperature with it. The snow whispered against the roof like static. But no one moved to relax. Kale stood sentinel at the door until Ruiz finally approached him with slow, open hands. "You knew they'd come," he said softly. Kyle didn't move. "You've been tracking them, haven't you? Since Nathan..." Ruiz didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. Kale turned his head just enough to meet the older man's gaze. And for the first time since this all began, Ruiz looked shaken. "He remembers," he whispered. "He remembers who they are." An alert chimed from the console. Nora rushed over. "Infrared pickup, 30 meters north," she said, pointing to the sensor map. "Just one not moving. Could be a scout. Could be a decoy." "I'll go," Dylan said, locking and loading the chamber of his weapon. "If someone's setting up shop near our tree line, we need to know now." "No," Nora said, reaching for her jacket. "We go together." But before either of them could move, Kale let out a short, sharp bark, almost a command. Then he turned and bolted through the back hatch before they could stop him. "Kale!" But he was already gone. Outside, the wind had picked up. The forest moaned as if warning them to turn back. Dylan and Nora followed the trail he left behind, footprints in the snow, precise and swift. Ash, surprisingly, whimpered again when Kale vanished into the tree line, but stayed pressed against Lena in the cabin, trembling slightly, as if some old programming inside him had activated. They found Kale minutes later near the edge of the ridge, standing completely still, facing a mound of snow and moss. The air was tense. Dylan raised his rifle. But then they saw it, the shape beneath the drift. Not a man, not a scout, a camera. A surveillance node barely larger than a coffee cup, shielded in carbon mesh, hidden in the roots of a tree Nathan himself had planted decades ago. Nora knelt beside it, heart pounding. This was planted here, recently, which means they've had eyes on this place before we even knew, Dylan muttered. Hell, maybe since the day Cale returned. As Nora reached out to disable the device, Cale stepped forward, pressing his body slightly in front of her. Not to stop her, to guard her. Even now, she looked up at him. They're not coming, Cale. They're already here, aren't they? Cale didn't move, but his tail rose steady, alert, and the growl that rolled from his throat was quiet, calculated, and unmistakably ready. War had a scent, and Cale had caught it. The morning broke cold and quiet. Too quiet. The snowfall overnight had layered the cabin in silence, a hush so complete it felt like the world was holding its breath. No wind, no birdsong, no prints in the snow. At least that's what Nora thought. Until Cale froze by the front door. He didn't bark, didn't growl. Just stopped, body rigid, nose flaring. Cale? She asked softly. He turned slightly, then looked down. There, on the wooden porch outside the door, untouched, unmarked, and perfectly centered lay a single white envelope. New postage. New name. New footprints. Dylan opened the door cautiously, weapon lowered but ready. The snow was untouched. Pristine. Not even a breeze to shift it. Whoever left the letter had either floated through the trees or knew exactly how to erase their trace. Cale sniffed the air again, but gave no signal. No clear threat, only tension. Like something was off, but distant, deliberate. Nora picked up the envelope. The paper was thick, textured military-grade stock, the kind used for secured memos. Her fingers brushed something familiar across the flap, a pressure seal used in encrypted mail during field ops. Whoever sent this knew her father's protocols. She broke the seal. Inside, a single typed letter, folded with surgical precision. And at the bottom, a handwritten signature in bold, slanted ink. Lucas Gray, Nora said aloud, voice tightening. I haven't heard that name in years. Dylan looked up from the surveillance monitor. Your dad's old research partner? He used to be. Before he went dark and started his own firm, Black Tier Security. Private ops, no oversight. Mercenary? Worse, she said quietly. He hires mercenaries. Ruiz came in from outside, brushing snow from his jacket. Gray's been on contract with both government and rogue clients. 1 year he's training NATO dogs, the next he's consulting in places the press can't spell. Nora didn't speak. Her eyes were scanning the contents of the letter, and with every line her face lost more color. She read aloud. Dr. Callahan, this is not a negotiation. The asset designated KL-9 is compromised property engineered under classified development as part of Project Cerberus, Tier 3. His presence at your location is a breach of operational containment and violates multiple recovery statutes. You will release the asset within 72 hours. Failure to comply will result in consequences that cannot be undone. If you value the safety of the girl, you will act accordingly. LG. Silence fell over the room. KL, still near the door, didn't react, but his ears were flat now, his gaze low, not in submission, but in memory. He knew that signature, that threat, that tone. It was the voice of someone who had once claimed to own him. Ash whimpered from the other side of the room. Lena, sensing the tension in the adults, sat frozen with her hand on the pup's back. Her eyes flicked to Cale, then to her mother. Mom, she said quietly. What does it mean? Nora crouched beside her, trying to summon the calm she didn't feel. It means someone dangerous thinks KL belongs to him. Lena's brow furrowed. He doesn't, M-Pen. Nora nodded, brushing her daughter's hair back gently. No, sweetie, he doesn't. Not anymore. But her hand trembled as she set the letter on the table. Because this wasn't just a threat to Cale. It was a threat to Lena. Ruiz paced near the fireplace, tension rising in his shoulders. They're making it personal. That's Gray's style. Fear before force. He knows we won't hand over Cale just because he asks, Dylan muttered. So he pushes the only button we can't ignore. Emson. Cale approached the table. Slowly, deliberately, and placed one paw on the edge near the letter. His eyes locked with Nora's. She knew what he was saying. I am not leaving her. Ruiz looked at the paper again. Cerberus Phase 3. That wasn't just psychological manipulation. That was ownership, mind, loyalty, will. And Nathan knew, Nora whispered. He must have found something deeper. Something Gray didn't want exposed. Dylan folded his arms. The files we pulled from Cale's collar. The corrupted audio. The phrase, Phase 3 begins. This letter confirms it. Gray's reactivating whatever's left of Cerberus. Or worse, Ruiz said grimly. He's trying to continue it. The group sat around the table, the fire crackling softly in the background. But no one touched the mugs of coffee growing cold in their hands. Cale lay near the door, alert but silent. Every so often his eyes would flick to Lena, as if reminding himself what he was fighting for. Night fell heavy. They double-checked the motion sensors, fortified the windows, reset all traps on the surrounding perimeter. But no one slept. Nora sat by the window, the letter in her lap. The stars bleeding cold light across the snow. Somewhere out there, Lucas Gray was watching, waiting, calculating how far he could push before the girl became collateral. And deep in the shadows of the forest, the dogs that once obeyed his voice were stirring again. The moon hung low and wide, a pale sentinel casting silver light across the pines. Frost shimmered on the cabin roof like breath held too long, afraid to exhale. The trees stood still, as if listening. Inside, Nora sat on the porch step, her jacket pulled tight, but the cold didn't bother her. Not tonight. Cale sat beside her, head high, eyes fixed toward the forest where danger now breathed. Ash lay curled in Lena's lap just inside the cabin, small body rising and falling in unsteady rhythm. The faintest thread of life knitting itself back together under the weight of something ancient, something unnatural. Nora could still feel the echo of Gray's letter in her hand. That dog belongs to us. Hand him over and the girl stays safe. She had read those words again and again, but each time they sank with the same hollow weight as if her father's ghost had whispered them. She reached down and brushed the ridge of Cale's shoulder. Muscle, warmth, a scar, and beneath that, memory. He looked up at her, ears twitching slightly, waiting. No one's taking you, she said. Not you, not Ash. Cale didn't move. But something in his eyes settled a silent agreement passed between soldiers who had lost more than they'd ever say. Inside, Dylan and Alejandro stood over the old map sprawled on the kitchen table. Faded topography lines, penciled margins, a few red X's left by Nathan's hand. Alejandro traced a finger across one in the northern region past the river cut and deep into a sliver of land that didn't show up on satellite grids. Here, he said, tapping it. Timberfall Ridge, technically sovereign territory, tribal land. Not even federal agencies can legally access it without notice. Dylan raised a brow. That's still assuming Gray plays by legal rules. Alejandro shrugged. He plays by silence. But even men like him think twice before stepping into a place the government doesn't touch, especially one with a history of protecting what the world forgets. Nora entered then, snow still clinging to her boots. She didn't ask what they were discussing. She simply looked at the map, then at Cale lying near the hearth, and said, "Tell me." Alejandro met her eyes. "There's a place up there. Used to be part of an off-the-books wildlife initiative. But over the years, it became something else. A sanctuary. Wolves, hybrid breeds, even a few test animals released when programs got shut down quietly. Programs like Cerberus?" He nodded. "Your father knew about it. He helped one of the elders set up tracking for displaced canines. He believed some of the animals were more than just tools gone rogue. He believed they remembered." Nora looked at Ash still asleep, the little pup twitching in half-dreams, and she thought of the scars, of the quiet sounds it made when touched gently, like echoes of pain had shaped its instincts, like it had survived, something meant to erase it. "We'd be safe there?" she asked. "Safe isn't the right word," Alejandro said. "But we'd be unreachable, at least for now." Dylan stood, running a hand over the stubble on his jaw. "Gray won't wait long. He's already watching us. And if he suspects we're running, then we move fast," Nora interrupted. Her voice was steady, stripped of doubt. "Tonight." She looked down at Cale. "Do you know the path?" Cale didn't move for a beat, just stared into her with that ancient stillness. Then he stood, walked to the door, and waited. They moved with quiet urgency. No headlights, only red-filtered flashlights and instinct. Supplies were bundled in silence. Files. The encrypted drive. Nathan's notes. Ash, bundled against Nora's chest in a carrier. Lena close behind. The moon lit the trail in shards of silver and shadow. KL led the way, no leash, no command, just purpose. Alejandro drove an old UTV through the first stretch of forest. After that, the ridge would be too dense for any machine. It would be foot travel 6 miles through frozen backcountry and one shallow ravine. They moved in near silence, their breath fogging the air. Every sound, a twig snap, an owl's cry felt like a warning. But it was Lena who broke the quiet, her voice soft as a prayer. "Mom, will Kale be safe there?" Nora knelt beside her. "He'll be free there." Lena looked up at the sky. "Then I want to go too." By the time they reached the halfway point, the forest felt heavier, denser, as if it remembered things. Ruiz paused, scanning the tree line. "They won't follow tonight," he murmured. "They're still watching, waiting for us to choose wrong." Nora turned to him. "And if they come tomorrow?" Alejandro's gaze didn't flinch. "Then let them come. Timberfall isn't just a sanctuary. It's a message. We protect our own." KL stopped ahead, nose in the wind. Then, without warning, he let out a low, brief huff. A signal. They had arrived. At the edge of the trees, a carved wooden marker stood half buried in snow. A symbol etched deep, half wolf, half handprint. Not a warning, a welcome. They stepped beyond the marker, and in the quiet glow of moonlight, a second figure appeared in the trees. A tall man in woven fur and leather, his face creased by time and wind. He looked at KL, then at Ash, and finally at Nora. "You're late," he said gently. "But not too late," Nora exhaled, something between relief and grief. "I won't let them take them," she said. "Not KL, not Ash." The man nodded. "Then you've come to the right place." Behind him, the trees opened just enough to show the faint outline of dwellings hidden in the land. Smoke curled from distant fires, and somewhere deeper, a wolf howled, not in warning, but in kinship. The storm had moved in. Without warning, a hush fell across Timberfall, like nature holding its breath. Snow laced the treetops in silence, muffling even the wind. The sanctuary's longhouse, carved deep into the land and warmed by stone hearths and cedar smoke, flickered with lamplight through the storm's veil. Inside, the room had dimmed, not because the fire had died, but because something else had. Ash lay curled in the woven nest Lena had built from scarves and soft pelts. But the pup no longer twitched in dreams, no more tiny yips or restless movement. He was still, too still. His breaths came ragged, shallow, each one a fragile whisper of survival. Lena sat beside him, knees pulled up, her hands hovering just above his fur as if afraid touch would shatter what little remained. Nora watched from the threshold, her arms folded tight against her chest, jaw clenched. She'd seen children in pain, soldiers, but nothing braced her for this, watching her daughter's heart crack in silence. "His fever's rising," Dylan murmured from the corner, where he'd been tracking symptoms on a notebook. "Tremors every few minutes, eyes unfocused. He's not responding to light or touch." "He was stable last night," Nora said, her voice hoarse. "He ate. He walked." "He was pretending," came a voice behind her. "Alejandro." He stepped forward slowly, hands empty. His face was unreadable, but his eyes, they held something heavy, like guilt dressed as knowledge. He was pushing past it. That's what they do, those that were made. Nora turned sharply. "He's a puppy." "Oh, no," Alejandro said quietly. "He looks like a puppy. But whatever they did to him, it's catching up. His nervous system wasn't meant to hold this long, and now it's failing." At that moment, Kale, who had been lying near the far wall, stood abruptly. He padded forward until he reached the edge of the nest. His breathing had quickened, ears pinned back, his entire body tense, not aggressive, not protective, but afraid. Kale let out a low whine, almost inaudible, a sound born of recognition, a sound only another survivor could make. Lena looked up. "He knows." Nora nodded. Yes. Then help him, the girl whispered to Cale. Please. Cale lowered his head, nose almost brushing Ash's paw, but he didn't move closer, didn't touch. He just stayed there, frozen in some war of instinct and memory. And then, for the first time since arriving at Timberfall, Cale backed away, not out of fear, but helplessness. Later, Alejandro returned with a bundle of herbs and a vial of powdered roots. Timberfall healers had suggested a mixture for fever, not a cure, but something to soothe. He's small, the elder woman had warned, and his blood, it sings differently. Be gentle. Lena refused to let anyone else administer it. She crushed the herbs in a stone bowl, mixed it with warm water, and gently dabbed the edges of Ash's tongue with the potion-soaked cloth. Ash didn't resist. But he didn't respond either. Come on, Lena whispered. I'm right here. His body trembled then, a violent shiver that shook through fur and bone. Lena gasped, wrapping her arms around him. Shh, I've got you. From across the room, Nora couldn't look away. The way her daughter held Ash not as a child cradling an animal, but as someone refusing to lose again, it reminded her too much of herself years ago, holding her father's jacket the night the news came through. There were some things in life too big to lose twice. That night, no one slept. Dylan kept pacing, checking notes, digging through every scrap of information Nathan had stored about Cerberus, any reference to pups, recovery protocols, fail-safes. Most of this was redacted, he said, frustrated. And the rest? Cryptic garbage about neurological drift and genetic recoil. They weren't building pets, Nora. They were testing endurance thresholds. Meaning what? Meaning the closer they bonded, the more they deteriorated. The stronger the connection, the greater the toll. Nora looked toward Lena, and her chest caved inward, because the connection was there, as real as anything she'd ever seen. A tether woven between the girl and the dying creature, one fragile and invisible but unmistakable. Sometime past midnight, the room had quieted, the fire had dimmed, and Ash stopped breathing. Just for a moment. One breath. Then none. Lena screamed, No! And as if something inside him heard her, Ash gasped. A thin, rattling inhale. Cale rushed forward this time, his body vibrating with a low whine. He pressed his nose into Ash's fur and stayed there, not moving, not leaving. Lena buried her face into Cale's neck, her tears soaking into his coat. Please, don't let him go. Cale closed his eyes, and for the first time let out a sound not born of instinct, but memory. A long, aching howl. Not loud, but full of something older than sorrow. The air inside the longhouse had grown still, as if the storm outside had seeped through the timber walls and frozen time. Ash lay in the cradle of Lena's arms, his breath thinner now, chest rising just enough to promise one more moment. His fur was damp with fever and tears. Cale hadn't moved from his post by the hearth, only watching, ears pinned, gaze dark with something unspoken. The others kept their distance. Even Alejandro, whose knowledge ran deeper than he let on, had nothing left to offer but silence. Then, from that silence, Lena began to hum. Soft, uneven, like memory trying to find its footing. It was an old tune, not quite a lullaby, just a line of melody Nathan used to hum when the world got too loud, when night fell heavy and Lena couldn't sleep. Something about the way he sang it always made her feel protected, like there was still warmth in the room after the fire burned out. She closed her eyes and sang the words, Carry the quiet into your bones, where thunder can't touch and fear can't roam. Ash stirred, only slightly, a flicker of his paw, the tip of his ear twitching as if reaching for the sound. Cale lifted his head. Lena's voice wavered but didn't stop. She pressed her forehead gently to Ash's and kept singing, letting the notes fill the spaces where hope had gone quiet. Sleep where the shadows cannot find. You are known. You are mine. A low sigh escaped Ash's lungs. Peaceful. Not an end, but a release. His breathing steadied just enough to bring stillness to the trembling. Nora watched from the doorway, her hand pressed against her lips. That song, it wasn't just a memory. It was a thread between past and present, between a man who had vanished and the lives still anchored to him. And Cale was watching Lena as if he'd heard it too. Not just as sound, but as recognition. Later, when Lena had fallen asleep, curled beside Ash on a woven mat, her breath sinking to his fragile rhythm, Nora sat by the hearth, rubbing a damp cloth between her fingers. Her eyes were fixed on Cale. He'd returned to his usual spot near the back wall, silent and alert. But there was something strange about how he'd been lying since nightfall, his head cocked slightly, paw resting against the leather of his old collar, which they'd reattached before the move. Nora's Gaze, narrow it. The collar had always seemed too bulky for Cale's lean frame, reinforced with inner stitching and something metallic beneath. She knelt beside him slowly. "Easy," she murmured. Cale didn't move. She gently unbuckled the strap, flipping it inside out. And there it was, a narrow seam, almost imperceptible, just behind the reinforced clasp. Nora used the edge of a knife to slice through the stitching. Something small clattered into her palm, cold, rectangular, barely the size of her thumb. A microdrive, black casing, no logos, no external markings, but etched faintly along the edge, in a hand Nora would have recognized anywhere. If you're reading this, it's not over. She stared at it for a long moment, heart pounding, then stood and crossed the room to where Dylan had set up a crude workstation with salvaged tech from Nathan's storage. "Can you get into this?" she asked, handing him the drive. Dylan blinked at it. "Where'd you?" Cale was wearing it. This whole time. Dylan inserted the drive into his laptop, the cracked screen flickering to life. Lines of code scrolled like static across the display. The interface was primitive, encrypted. Layers upon layers of dead ends. And then, a prompt. "Password required." "Great," Dylan muttered. "Any guesses?" Nora's eyes stayed on the screen, but her mind was somewhere else. Her father had been methodical but personal. Every password he ever created meant something. She closed her eyes. What would he choose? If he knew, it might be his last. "Try Lena's Echo," she whispered. Dylan typed it in. Nothing. He tried again. Timberfall 92. Still nothing. One more. She looked at Cale. "Try Cerberus Phase of 3. Dylan entered it. The screen blinked, and then opened. Lines of decrypted files appeared. Corrupted audio clips. Video feeds. GPS logs. A folder named simply Cale. Iterations. "Holy hell," Dylan muttered. "These are test logs. Military. There's stuff here that shouldn't exist. EEG patterns, behavioral sync trials, neurolimbic response data." He clicked on the first audio clip. A burst of static. Then, garbled voices layered, like someone had tried to overwrite the file but failed. "Begin phase 3. Resistance exceeding baseline. Subject exhibits residual recall. Test subject Cale." And then, clearer, near the end, Nathan's voice. "If something happens to me, protect Lena. Cale knows. He remembers more than they think." Nora's breath caught. Dylan froze, fingers hovering above the keyboard. He knew. He knew they were coming for him. Cale stood then. Not fast, but with intent. He stepped forward, eyes trained on the screen. His ears twitched once. A growl rumbled in his throat, not from anger, but understanding. Nora turned to him. "You knew this was in there, didn't you?" Kyle didn't answer, but his gaze locked on the last file. A short clip, labeled only, "Goodbye, Wave." Nora hesitated, then clicked. Nathan's voice, barely above a whisper. "If you're hearing this, then I didn't make it. And if Cale's with you, then something worked. Maybe not the way we planned, but enough. Enough to try again. Keep her safe. Keep them safe. The truth's buried deep, and Cerberus isn't finished." Static. Then silence. Outside, the storm had begun to lift, but in its wake, something else had settled. A truth heavier than snow, and a goodbye that felt less like an ending and more like a key. The morning light was pale, silvered by frost clinging to the cabin windows. No wind, no sound beyond the steady breath of those who'd made it through the night. Ash was still alive. It felt like a miracle drawn in silence. Lena sat cross-legged on the woven mat, her fingers gently stroking the space behind Ash's ear, the one soft spot that always seemed to make him relax. His fever had broken some time before dawn. His breathing had steadied, And though he couldn't stand, his eyes tracked her now, not with fear or pain, but something close to peace. Nora knelt beside them, checking Ash's pulse with the practiced hand. Her eyes met Lena's, both of them, exhausted, but full of something deeper. "You kept him here," Nora whispered. Lena didn't answer. She just nodded, clutching Ash a little closer. Behind them, Dylan zipped the final duffel shut. Alejandro stood at the cabin door, watching the tree line, his shoulders taut beneath layers of wool and Kevlar. The snowfall had stopped overnight, but the danger hadn't. Lucas Gray wouldn't wait forever. "We leave in 15, Alejandro said quietly. "The trail toward Timberfall Sanctuary starts through the southern ravine. If they're watching, they'll expect us to take the highway." "And the girl?" Dylan asked, glancing toward Lena. "She rides with me," Nora said firmly. "Kale, too." Lena looked up, her voice surprisingly steady.
"Number I'll carry Ash."
"You sure?" Nora frowned. Lena nodded. "He trusts me now." They all looked to Kale. He sat near the hearth, where the embers still glowed faintly. His ears flicked toward the group, his eyes trained on Lena. She rose slowly, slipped her arms beneath Ash's trembling frame, and lifted him into the soft sling they had made from Nathan's old Ranger parka. Ash didn't resist. His body melted into her, head resting beneath her chin. Gael stood, and for the first time since they'd arrived, he moved without hesitation, pacing directly beside Lena, close enough that their arms brushed when she stepped forward. Dylan watched with something between awe and disbelief. "He won't even let me brush past him," he muttered. Alejandro allowed himself the smallest of smiles. "They've bonded. It's not something you force. It's something you earn." Kale paused at the threshold and glanced over his shoulder, a last look at the cabin that had held them through the storm. The fire. The revelations. The memory of a man who once believed in second chances, and a song that still lingered in the walls. Then he turned forward. They moved out. The snow crunched beneath their boots as they began the trek down the ridge, shadows long in the morning hush. Alejandro led, eyes scanning the ridgeline, fingers grazing the rifle slung over his back. Nora followed close behind, with Dylan flanking the opposite side, his breath sharp in the cold. And at the center of it all, Lena. Her steps were slow but sure, guided not by instruction but instinct. Ash was nestled against her chest, breathing in time with the rhythm of her heart. Kale walked so close she could feel the warmth of him through her coat. Every few strides, his head would tip slightly, sniffing the air, eyes flicking between trees. Not as a soldier, but as something older, protective, tribal, a sentinel reborn. They were a unit now, a pack, and it was Kale who defined its boundaries. When a crow screamed overhead and Dylan reached for his sidearm, Kale was faster positioning himself between Lena and the threat before anyone else could react. His fur bristled, but he didn't bark. He didn't need to. The message was clear. "You go through me first." Lena reached down and brushed his back with her free hand. He leaned into it, not enough to lose pace, just enough to say, "I know you're there." Nora, glancing back, caught the moment. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. She remembered how Kale had once flinched from every touch, how he'd growled low at any attempt to intervene even from her. And now, without command, without collar or code word, he had chosen this girl. Chosen them. The slope steepened. Alejandro gestured to duck low beneath a fallen cedar. Lena crouched with care, keeping Ash tight against her chest. Kale followed, matching her every move like a shadow, trained to mirror not just action, but emotion. And when they reached the ridge's edge, when the valley spread open before them like a white breath drawn between mountains, Kale stopped. He turned, looking back the way they came. So did Lena. Nothing moved behind them. No boots, no engines, just snow and sky and silence. But they all knew that wouldn't last. Nora approached quietly. "We'll rest at the hollow just past the ravine," she said. "Then we move again. Gray's reach is longer than we think." Lena nodded, though her eyes didn't leave the ridge. Kale gave a short chuff, more breath than sound, and nudged her leg with his snout. A gentle prod, an encouragement. "We're okay," she said aloud, mostly to herself. And in that moment, she believed it. They reached a clearing where the trees parted just enough to let the sun pool through. Alejandro made the call to pause. Nora unwrapped a ration bar and passed half to Lena, who ate without complaint. Dylan checked the map. The Timberfall Sanctuary lay another 6 miles south, deep within tribal land, where satellites didn't reach and maps grew blurry. Lena crouched beside Cale, gently pulling Ash from the sling and resting him against her thighs. His eyes fluttered open, glassy, tired, but still there. She smiled through the ache in her chest. "You did good, buddy. We're almost there." Cale nosed Ash's head once, then turned and settled at Lena's side, pressing against her, like a heartbeat made of fur and breath. And without meaning to, without speaking it aloud, Lena whispered what the others hadn't dared to say. "We're a pack now. No one's alone." Cale's tail thumped once against the snow, and for the first time in days, the world felt quiet, not from threat, but from belonging. The wind, at the ridgeline, bit like knives. It screamed through the crags of Black Hollow Gorge, dragging pine needles and whispers of frost through the air. A hawk circled overhead, wings wide, silent, as if watching with ancient judgment. Below, 2 men crouched in the snow beside a crate that looked innocuous to the untrained eye. Weathered wood, scratched surface, a military latch retrofitted with civilian padlocks. It could have passed for hunting gear or medical cargo, but it wasn't. Inside were ash-soaked rags, tufts of faux fur, and a thermal patch soaked in the scent of sedative engineered to mimic the biochemical signature of a heavily drugged K9. Alejandro clicked the lid shut. "You sure it's convincing?" Dylan asked, pulling his jacket tighter. Alejandro didn't answer right away. He knelt by the crate, fingers lingering over the latch like a man offering a prayer. His breath clouded the air, slow and even. "They'll follow it," he said finally, "especially if they've got scent drones tuned to Cale's old signature. The rags we used were from the storage kit Nathan left, enough residual DNA to trigger false positives." Dylan exhaled, shaking out his shoulders. "What about visual ID? I burned the sides, scorched the edges just enough. From a distance, it'll read like a body crate in distress. Gray won't be able to resist." The 2 men rose in unison, the unspoken tension between them like static. They both knew what this was, a game of calculated sacrifice. And somewhere out there, Gray's men were already moving. About 3 clicks east, Nora was tightening the straps on Lena's snow boots. "You need to step where I step," she said gently, "and keep Ash pressed close to your chest. The cold up there can cut through even if you don't feel it at first." Lena nodded. She looked older today, not in years, but in the quiet way her eyes had stopped searching for safety and started creating it. Ash was tucked into a modified sling against her jacket, his breathing shallow but steady. Cale sat beside her, alert but not anxious. His ears twitched toward the horizon, tracking movement the rest couldn't hear. His body remained still, coiled yet calm, a creature who understood this wasn't a fight but a crossing. Nora stepped back and adjusted her rifle strap. "Alejandro and Dylan will head west through the logging roads with the decoy. It'll buy us time, maybe hours, maybe less." Lena looked up. "And we're taking the gorge?" "The high trail," Nora said. "Black Hollow's not used in winter. Too steep, too exposed. That's why it's perfect. No one with a drone or scanner will think anyone would be stupid enough to go that way." Cale gave a soft huff. Nora raised an eyebrow at him. "Yeah, I know. That includes us." Back at the decoy site, Alejandro and Dylan covered their tracks using a combination of fake snow and a powder Dylan called thermal dust, designed to reflect body heat for satellite eyes. "We'll have to move fast," Dylan muttered. "Once they pick this up, they'll come in hard." Alejandro stared down the tree line. "Good. Let them." For the briefest moment, Dylan hesitated. He looked toward the ravine where Nora and Lena had already disappeared into the mouth of the mountains. A pang hit him then, sharp and uninvited. He'd never expected to care this much. Not about a teenage girl, not about a half-dead wolf dog, and definitely not about an old scarred K9 with eyes like storm glass. But something had shifted in all of them. This was no longer just about survival. It was about what gets to survive. The climb into Black Hollow Gorge was brutal. Nora led, carving steps into the hardened snowpack with each strike of her boot. The air thinned quickly, and every breath felt like pulling ice through cloth. Lena followed close behind, Ash's small weight anchored against her. Cale moved as if he had always belonged to the mountain, agile, fluid, silent. They stopped, briefly beneath a frozen overhang. The sun was barely more than a smear of gray above the peaks. "Rest here," Nora said. "Just for a minute?" Lena sank into the snow, breath shallow, heart hammering. Ash stirred. Cale pressed his body against them both, as if shielding them from the cold. "I never asked you," Nora said softly, crouching beside her. "What made you sing to him?" Lena blinked. "It's the only thing I remembered clearly from my dad. He used to hum that song when I had seizures, said the rhythm could ground the storm." Nora didn't respond for a long time. Then, "It worked." Lena smiled faintly. Maybe it wasn't the song. Maybe it was just knowing someone stayed. Cale's head tipped slightly, and he leaned into Lena's shoulder. A warm, wordless yes. Back near the tree line, Alejandro watched the small drone camera flicker to life. He'd buried it in a hollow log, angled toward the trail leading to the decoy crate. Within minutes, movement triggered the feed. Dark figures, tactical gear, no insignias. "Gray's men. They took the bait," Dylan said. Alejandro didn't reply. He was already turning. "Then we move." By dusk, snow had started falling again, soft at first, like ash from a faraway fire. The path narrowed to a ledge that wrapped around the rim of Black Hollow Gorge. Below them, jagged spires of black stone jutted through white fog like teeth. Lena gripped the rock with one hand, Ash secured tightly in his sling. Cale took the outer edge, his body acting as both guide and guard. Nora offered her hand at a narrow crossing. Lena didn't hesitate. She took it, and together, under the weight of fear and snow and love unspoken, they crossed the edge of the world. The snow was falling harder now, sideways against the slope, carving silver lines across the air like scars on the skin of the mountain. The sound of wind had changed, no longer the hush of wilderness, but something colder, mechanical. Cale froze, ears pricked forward, body lowered. A guttural sound barely rose in his throat. Nora noticed it instantly. His stance defensive, agitated, meant only one thing. They were being watched. Lena looked up from the trail just as Nora swung her rifle from her back, scanning the ridgeline behind them. "Drone," she said. Low. "Southwest quadrant. Model's small, but that pitchet's one of Gray's." Dylan had warned them about this. High-speed thermal drones, tuned to detect heat clusters even in blizzard conditions. They didn't need to see faces. They just needed the pattern: 3 bodies close together. 1 adult, 1 child, 1 canine. The signature was unmistakable. Lena's breath caught in her throat. Her eyes went to Ash cradled against her chest inside the insulated sling. He was awake now, blinking slowly, fever-glazed but alert. And then, without a word, Lena did something no one expected. She knelt, unhooked the sling, and whispered something into Ash's ear. Nora's head snapped toward her. "Lena, what are you doing?" But the girl didn't respond. Her face was set, not desperate, not reckless. Certain. Ash hesitated for a single heartbeat. Then he looked up at her, those pale eyes wide with pain and trust, and something older than either of them. "Run," she mouthed again. And like a shadow being pulled from the earth, Ash moved. He bolted through the snow like a phantom, no bark, no hesitation. Just the blur of muscle and instinct and heartbreak tearing downhill in the direction opposite the trail. He vanished into the fog almost instantly, swallowed by the white. The drone shifted. Its whine changed frequency, camera locking onto the sudden, singular heat signature moving perpendicular to the group. A false escape. It took the bait. Nora watched it drift after the fleeing form and cursed under her breath. Cale exploded forward. His bark, raw and low, split the air like a wound, and he took off in pursuit. But Nora was faster. Her boot skidded in the snow as she grabbed for his harness, fingers digging into the webbing just behind his neck. "No!" she barked. Cale thrashed, half rearing, snow spraying from his paws. His eyes locked on the vanishing trail Ash had left behind. His body screamed to follow, but Nora held fast. "You can't help him now. That's not what this is." Cale growled not at her, but at the impossibility of it. His breath steamed like a furnace, teeth bared, muscles rippling beneath his coat. Lena stood frozen. Her cheeks were wet, though she hadn't made a sound. "I didn't ask," she whispered, not looking at anyone. "I just knew he would go." Nora's grip on Cale loosened just slightly as his weight shifted back down, settling into something like restraint. His chest still heaved, but he no longer strained against her. He understood. That was the worst part. Minutes passed. Silent, brittle minutes where no one moved, and even the wind seemed to hush itself. They watched the drone vanish westward, swallowed by the trees and the storm. With it went the faintest echo of Ash's paw steps, the soft percussion of trust given and trust answered. Nora finally exhaled, her voice a scrape in the cold. "That buys us maybe 20 minutes. We need to move." "Him?" Lena didn't speak, but her legs carried her forward automatically, as if they no longer belonged to her. KL followed close, his shoulder pressed lightly to her thigh with every step. The message was clear. One of them had turned the tide. Now the rest had to survive it. They pressed deeper into the gorge, their trail vanishing behind them with each fresh gust of snow. The walls narrowed again, squeezing them into the shadows of stone and pine. Above them, crows circled like black flecks in a shaken snow globe. Cale stopped once to glance back. No ash, only wind and white, and the faint static of silence where once there was breath and heartbeat. Nora's voice broke gently through the quiet. "What you did, it wasn't wrong." Lena kept walking. "I knew if I waited for anyone to tell me it was okay, it'd be too late," she said. There was something cracked in her tone, not broken, not yet, but splintered, like glass underfoot. Nora said nothing more. What comfort could be offered to a child who just handed away her heart to save the people she loved? There were no right words, just the ache of footsteps in snow, the echo of loss trailing behind them like smoke. Far behind, deep in the trees, Ash ran. His lungs burned. Every step felt like knives up his legs. But something inside him, some ancestral spark buried in the twisted map of his genes, told him not to stop. Not yet. He was a whisper now, a decoy with breath, a heartbeat traded for time. Behind him, the drone scanned and recorded and confirmed. Subject located, thermal match high, direction erratic, pattern survival flight. No one noticed the collar had loosened just enough. No one noticed when it slipped free, fell into the snow, and vanished beneath the white. Ash didn't need a name anymore. He just needed to keep running. By the time they reached the northern ridge, the storm had begun to break, not with light, but with silence. The wind settled into long exhales, the kind that curled through trees like fingers brushing memory. The snow thinned, revealing patches of soft earth beneath the frost. Pines loomed in dense clusters, towering like ancient guardians. Their bark slick with time, their roots deep in forgotten soil. Nora adjusted the strap on her pack, eyes scanning the tree line ahead. "We're close," she said, breath misting. Cale stepped beside her, ears forward, his posture relaxed for the first time in hours. Something in the air had shifted, not safety, not yet, but something older. Familiar in the way instinct is familiar, the way grief finds silence, the way predators know when they are no longer being hunted. Lena followed just behind, her arms wrapped around herself. She hadn't spoken much since Ash had broken away. She didn't need to. KL stayed near, his flank brushing her side now and then, like a metronome keeping time in a new rhythm, one made of trust and shared loss. And then they saw it, the break in the trees. Not a gate, not a wall, just a shift in the forest where shadows moved differently and the very air carried weight. A man stood waiting just beyond the threshold. He was old, but not fragile. Hair like smoke, streaked with night. Eyes the color of burnt cedar. Skin carved by sun and time. He stood straight, draped in wool and leather, beads strung around his neck, hands folded over a carved walking stick that seemed more ceremonial than practical. Behind him, 3 other figures waited in quiet deference. Silent, unmoving, part of the woods. Nora slowed. She didn't need introduction. This was Elijah Elder of Timberfall, keeper of the shadowed forest, and one of the last who still remembered when wolves walked alongside men without chains. He stepped forward just as Cale crossed the invisible boundary of trees and stopped. Cale froze, not out of fear but recognition. Elijah tilted his head slightly, his voice low, thick with gravel and something sacred. "This one carries pain of both man and beast," he said. "He walks between." Nora inhaled, the words sinking into her like stone. Kale's ears flattened. He looked up at the elder, then down again. Almost reverent. Lena's eyes widened. Elijah knelt, one knee pressing softly into the moss-covered ground. He extended his hand, palm open. Kale took a step forward and placed his head beneath it. It wasn't obedience. It was acknowledgement. Elijah's fingers moved through the thick fur behind Kale's ears, resting where the scar still healed that ragged line across his skull. He didn't flinch. He didn't pull away. The elder closed his eyes. "They carved into you," he whispered. "Not to hurt, not even to own, but to erase. You endured, and because of that, the line remains." No one spoke. Even the forest seemed to hold its breath. Then, softly, Elijah rose. "To the north," he said, facing Nora now. "Beyond the first bend, there is a clearing ringed in aspen. You'll find warmth and time there. Enough, I hope, to let the girl sleep without fear." Nora dipped her head. "We're grateful," she said, her voice carrying weight beyond just the words. He looked to Lena and softened. "She speaks less than most," he murmured. "But she hears more." Lena blinked. She wasn't sure how to respond, but Kale nudged her hand gently, grounding her. "I didn't want him to go," she whispered. "Ash." Elijah nodded slowly. "Part of you still walks with him. The thread hasn't broken, only stretched." Then, without command, the silent figures behind Elijah moved, motioning them into the grove. Not with words, just gestures. The kind born of old trust and long winters. They walked in silence for a while. The forest thickened, but the air grew warmer, almost imperceptibly. Tiny crystals of ice clung to branches like lace. A stream whispered somewhere in the distance, threading silver through the undergrowth. The clearing opened like a breath held too long. Moss blanketed the ground, steaming faintly from geothermal warmth beneath. A fire ring waited, stones dark with memory. A small wooden structure, more shelter than cabin, stood tucked between two split trees, their trunks forming a natural archway. Nora exhaled for the first time in what felt like days. Kyle walked the perimeter, sniffing, ears flicking. Lena sank to her knees near the fire ring, her body trembling from cold, from grief, from everything she hadn't let herself say. Nora moved behind her and wrapped a blanket around her shoulders. Said nothing, just held the silence with her. Kyle finally settled, lying at Lena's side, his body curved protectively around her back. She leaned into him without hesitation. Night fell slowly in Timberfall, not like the fast collapse of city dusk, but like ink poured gently into water. The stars came out one by one, piercing the dark canopy with patient light. Inside the shelter, Nora unrolled her gear and checked her weapon, every movement methodical. Kale remained by the door, eyes open, ears twitching to every faint rustle. Lena slept curled on the furs, fingers still buried in his coat. And outside, just beyond the edge of firelight, Elijah stood once more, a silhouette wrapped in forest, watching, guarding, as if he too knew the world would come for them again. But not yet. Tonight, among shadows and snow and breath still warm from survival, they were safe. The fire in the Timberfall shelter had burned low, fading to quiet orange coals. Outside, the wind whispered through pine cracks, brushing across Kale's fur as he lay at the door, alert but still. Dylan's fingers worked the laptop, face lit only by its dull glow. The USB drive retrieved from Kale's collar blinked softly. 4 hours of failed decryption. Then, finally, a click. A soft whine. Then a voice. "Nathan Hale, clearance Omega 7. If you're seeing this, it means I failed." The air shifted. Nora turned from the window. Lena stirred beside Kale. Dylan hit play. The video was grainy, handheld. Nathan appeared gaunt, exhausted. Behind him, caged animals, barking, whimpering. The sounds were unmistakable. Puppies. Nathan's voice trembled. "Project Asclepius is out of control. You can't force obedience through fear and expect anything but breakage. They're not machines. They're children with claws." The screen turned to biometric overlay cortisol spikes, neural flares in canine brains. Gray's voice echoed faintly. "Compliance is survival, Doctor. What we're doing is mercy." Nathan scoffed. "You're mutilating instinct, injecting litters at 4 weeks. Microstem recall conditioning. Withdrawing mother voice to reinforce pain. Lena's breath hitched. Kale tensed. I watched a pup bite off its own tail during a fear spike, just to make the pain predictable. More logs. One file stood out. Ash, batch 117, log 7, MP4. Lena whispered, "He was in it, wasn't he?" Dylan didn't reply. He didn't need to. The next video showed Kalen scarred collapsing under a pulse tone. Ash, trembling in a corner pin, muzzle bloody where he'd tried to chew out a tracking chip. Overlaid audio. Subject resists, loop protocol. Readminister. Test override using mother call bait. Kyle stepped toward the screen. Not a growl, just a deep, broken sound. Nathan's face returned. His voice was barely more than a whisper.
There's a sanctuary on Timberfall soil. I encrypted the coordinates.
Look for the glyph 3 arcs into sun, you'll know. He paused. They called it obedience through fear, but they were wrong. He said it again, softer. They were wrong. The screen went black. No one spoke. Nora closed the laptop. We have to finish what Nathan started. Lena rose slowly. Her chin no longer shook. We can't let them do it again. Dylan cleared his throat. There's more. He opened a second folder. Blueprints. Genetic trials. Manifests. At the bottom, unit, tremor echo, status, in transit. Kale stared. Nora felt her chest tighten. Dylan tried to open the file. Locked. Red warning. Voice print required. Nathan Hale. I'll get in, Dylan muttered. Just need time. Nora looked toward the trees. Time's what we don't have. She turned to Lena. Get some rest. We move at dawn. But Lena shook her head. I want to be awake when Ash comes back. No one argued. Kale returned to her side, curling against her. His flank against her leg a silent anchor. Outside, the moon carved silver paths between trees. Inside, the truth waited. Raw. Alive. Ash's name had been in the files. Kale's face in the footage. Gray's voice haunted every second. They didn't need permission anymore. They had proof, and soon they'd have justice. By morning, mist curled low through the trees. The coals had cooled, but the room still held warmth. Lena hadn't moved from the floor. She sat wrapped in a blanket Kale had nudged over during the night. One hand rested on his chest, rising and falling. Then Kyle stirred. Ears perked, stilled. Another breath passed, then a shift. A footfall, unsteady, then a second, then paw scrabbling across the porch. Kale stood and howled. It wasn't fear. It was joy raw and full. Lena's eyes snapped to the door. Her blanket dropped. A soft thump, a weight against the frame. Nora opened it. Ash stood swaying in the dawn, ribs still visible, flanks streaked with burrs and blood. His left leg dragged, but his tail wagged weak, steady. His eyes found Lena. She didn't speak, just dropped to her knees. Ash crossed the threshold and collapsed into her. No leap, no bark, just home. Her arms wrapped around him, shaking. She buried her face in his neck. Her breath came in stutters. Ash didn't move. He didn't need to. KL circled, then lay down, touching Ash's paw with his muzzle. He nudged his shoulder once. Ash flicked his tail. Enough. KL curled just close enough to press against both Ash and Lena. A circle. A pack. Dylan leaned against the frame, rubbing his eyes. You're kidding me, he said. He outran a drone, crossed 3 miles of ridge, and still came back. Nora smiled. Small, but real. Ash isn't little, Lena said hoarsely. He's just fast where it matters. Dylan grinned. I stand corrected. Lena cupped Ash's face. He blinked slowly, licked her thumb. The scar near his muzzle was healing. His eyes clearer. You came back, she whispered. Ash huffed. Of course I did. KL let out a low chuff. Agreement. The silence afterward was safe. Timberfall breathed again. Dylan knelt, folding his jacket into a pillow. Lena laid Ash's head gently on it. I told you he was a scout, she whispered. He always comes back. Nora crouched nearby, hand on Kale's back. He did more than survive, she said. He chose. Lena blinked. Chose? He came back to you. That's a choice. Her chest tightened. Her father once said trust wasn't something you taught animals. It was something they gave when you proved worthy. Ash had chosen. Again, Dylan pointed to the laptop.
The file's still locked. But if we have both of them, maybe that's the key.
What do you mean? Lena asked. The voice print. What if it wasn't just Nathan's voice? What if it was KL's? Or Ash's? Multi-species encryption. Kale tilted his head. Nora blinked. That's disturbingly brilliant. Welcome to the new world, Dylan muttered. But in that moment, none of it mattered. Not the encryption. Not the mission. Just a girl. And her two protectors. Ash sighed, settling into her lap. Kale exhaled, resting his head across Ash's flank. And in the stillness between grief and fire, there was peace. Not forever, but enough. Later, fire came again. Not from inside, but outside violent. Hungry. Dylan almost missed it. Smoke poured in first. Then heat. The decoy safe house's window cracked, then shattered. He didn't grab the gear, just the drive. And ran. The woods burned in waves behind him, orange against black, shadows jerking sideways. He fell once, coughed until ash choked his throat. He didn't look back. At the tree line, he collapsed. Then he heard it. Not flames, not wind. A voice. Crackled. Cold. Nice try. Then silence. And that was worse. By the time Dylan reached the real cabin, Kale was already at the door. Head low, ears pinned, watching the forest like it was about to speak. They almost did. Nora opened the door. Her eyes found the soot on Dylan's face before anything else.
Where's Alejandro?
She asked. Dylan shook his head. Lips cracked from smoke. Gone. He knew. He stayed to stall them. Buy me time. Lena stood behind her, holding Ash close in a sling. Her mouth opened, then closed. No sound came out. The tension moved like electricity through the room. Dylan dropped the half-melted laptop on the table. They knew. Not just the decoy. They knew it was a trap, and they came anyway. That means someone cracked the old comm line, or we've got a trace in the drive. Nora didn't answer immediately. She moved to the window, pushed the curtain just enough to see the slope beyond.
How long?
Dylan swallowed. 6 hours, maybe less. They're not trying to hide anymore. Gray's coming. Himself. Lena's breath hitched. KL let out a low, guttural growl. Not loud, not angry, just certain. No more misdirection, Dylan muttered. No more safe houses, no more hideouts in the trees. It's over. No, Nora said, her voice flat. It's just beginning. She turned to Kale, then to Ash. The little dog lifted his head at her voice, eyes still hazy with exhaustion. But there was clarity there now. Purpose. The fire hadn't burned that away. He's forcing us into open ground, Nora continued. He thinks we'll run. Again. And we won't? Dylan asked. Number. She looked at Lena. We've run enough. The cabin was silent. Even the forest had gone still, as if holding its breath before the storm. Lena stepped forward, her arms tightening around Ash. We'll stay, she said. We'll fight. Her voice didn't shake. Not this time. Kale moved to her side, pressed his body to her calf. Ash thumped his tail once. Like agreement, or a heartbeat. Nora glanced at the window again, the faint smell of smoke still clinging to Dylan's jacket like a warning.
Check the perimeter, she said. Every trap, every fallback, every blind angle.
Dylan nodded, wiping soot from his hands. And the drive? Nora looked at it scarred, blackened, but still pulsing faintly with power. We finish what we started, she said. We unlock the truth, and when he comes, her eyes narrowed. We make sure he hears it. M? Outside, the smoke from the ruined cabin had begun to rise like a flag into the gray sky. It would reach Gray. He'd know. And still, they didn't run. Not this time. At first, it was subtle. A glint beyond the timberline. A hush where wind should have stirred. Even the insects stopped early that morning. Kale felt it first. Rigid near the slope, nose high, his body coiled tight as a drawn bow. He wasn't listening to a sound, but the lack of one. Beside him, Ash stood small but alert, mimicking Kale's posture like a student memorizing breath. And it was working. From the ridge, Nora's breath caught through binoculars. "They're here," she whispered. White trucks. Timberfall Conservancy, Logosoft Center. Cheap vinyl. Wolves, replaced with smudged silhouettes. "Gray," she muttered. Dylan asked, "How many?" 4 trucks, at least 8 men, 2 with rifles. "They're not trying to fool us," Nora said. "Just the cameras." And inside the cabin, Elder Elias stirred herbs in silence. Lena watched him. "They've come, haven't they?" He didn't look at her. A sickness always wraps itself in clean cloth before it knocks. Outside, Kyle moved. No sound, no bark. Just disappeared into the trees, Ash trailing him like a second shadow. They moved in loops 20 feet, pause, ears forward, then again, like a ritual only dogs and ghosts could understand. From her position by the creek, Nora watched 2 men exit a truck. One held a clipboard, the other, a rifle. Barrel gleamed in the morning sun. "They're staging," she said into the mic. "Elias Grove, South Bluff. It's a full encirclement." Dylan's voice returned, terse. "Encrypted comms, military grade, no negotiation. They're here to end it." Lena stayed close to the cabin. Ash's sling hung loosey, refused to stay in it today. He paced beside Kale now, sharper, focused. At the camp's western edge, Kale froze. Crouched behind pine, ear flicked backward toward Ash, a silent command. Ash dropped low. Ahead, a man emerged slowly, tracking, unaware he was being tracked. Neither dog moved. The man paused, then retreated into fog. Back inside, Elia tied a red cloth around Lena's wrist. "For courage?" she asked. He shook his head. "For memory, so the forest knows your side." Ash pressed against her leg. His eyes were dark, unreadable, not fear readiness. By dusk, the trucks no longer bothered to pretend. Men erected a field tent near the ridge. Badges read, "Containment Control." Kale returned from the final sweep. Coat damp, gaze unwavering. "He's testing us," Nora murmured, resting a hand on his side. Kyle let out a single huff. Not warning, just present. Inside, Dylan decrypted the last file from Nathan's drive. Obedience through fear wasn't a theory, he said. It was a method, not just for dogs. Nora's eyes narrowed. Outside, a floodlight snapped on. Cold and white. Men in lab coats with rifles moved like phantoms. Lena hadn't meant to leave the perimeter. Nora had warned her. "Stay by the cabin. Keep Ash close." But something pulled her. Maybe Kale's earlier growlo. Off. Not threat. Worry. Or maybe it was the flicker of metal in the woods. She followed. And froze. 2 men knelt beside a cylindrical object. One tapped a tablet. "Once it's live, the tone pulls him out," the taller one said. 18,000 hertz. He won't resist. "Pain spike if he gets close," the other added. "Drives him toward the net. No blood. Just break him." Lena's stomach twisted. "Kyle." A twig snapped under her foot. Both men turned, hands on holsters. She ducked behind a stump, heart hammering. "Probably a deer," one muttered. Footsteps receded. She sprinted back, breathless, into Dylan's arms. "They're using a lure," she gasped. "A tone. It hurts him. Drives him." "You're sure?" She nodded. Nora went still. Old memories flashed, steel crates, trembling dogs, silence between screams. Ash whimpered at her tone. Lena knelt. "I won't let them touch him. Or you." That night, Lena pulled out her father's notebook. The pages curled like bark. She flipped through here sketches, sound charts until she found it. Aural interference response in Shepherd Breed's margin notes. Pain range, 17,200, 18,900 hertz. Disrupt with polarity interference. She didn't understand all of it, but she understood enough. An hour later, Nora found her by the ash ring, soldering wires. "Where'd you learn this?" "Dad, let me help. Thought I wasn't watching, but I always was." Ash sat beside her, ears drawn back. Tension shimmered like mist. He said, "Dogs don't need us to understand their pain. Just not ignore it." Nora's voice trembled. "You're like him, but not him. You're you." Does that scare you? No, Nora said. It scares them. Before dawn, Lena crept to the ridge with the finished device. The lure blinked faintly in the leaves. She knelt, wired the disruptor to its base. Sorry, Dad, if I blow this up. She turned the dial. The blink died. A faint whine. Then, nothing. Cale appeared behind her. No sound. Just presence. He pressed his forehead into her palm. The trap was broken, but not the war. Later that evening, Ash lay near the shed, listening. Every shift of wind mattered now. Cale had taught him. Don't just hear listen for silence that doesn't fit. Then a boot step. Click. Then another. Ash rose. Not as a pup. As Scout. 2 men in black crouched at the western fuel tank, whispering. We placed the charge. Thermal delay. 10 minutes. Gray wants the camp in Ash. Ash moved. Every step quiet, fluid. The taller man leaned forward to arm the charge and never saw it coming. Ash hit him like lightning paws first, not teeth. The detonator flew. The man reached for a weapon. Ash clamped down on his forearm. Blood hit the dirt. The second man raised a stun baton. It struck Ash's flank pain, burst like fire, but he didn't let go. Cale once told him, pain is not the end. It's the alarm before instinct wakes up. Ash pivoted, kicked the man's knee, sending him sprawling into the woodpile. Now Ash stood between them and the charge, muzzle bloodied, eyes burning. The intruders hesitated just long enough. Then Cale's growl cracked the silence. Dylan's voice followed, down. Flashlights, boots, shouts. By sunrise, the village stirred. Ash limped to the fire circle on 3 paws. Refused help. Lena dropped beside him. You idiot, she whispered. You beautiful, reckless idiot. Ash collapsed into her lap. She brushed her hand over his burn mark. I'll fix it, she promised. You saved us. Dylan stood beside Cale. He's not just following anymore. He's becoming you. Kyle didn't answer, but the way his tail rested near Ash's paw said enough. Later, Elia examined the half-disarmed explosive. They didn't come to scare us, he said. They came to erase us. Nora watched Ash by the hearth, curled in sleep. He stopped them, she whispered. Not a sidekick now. A spark. A sentinel. That night, before the final standoff, Lena sat by the fire. Ash's head rested on her knee. You weren't supposed to be a hero yet, she whispered. Ash thumped his tail once. She looked toward the woods. Cale still walked alone, guarding shadows. And she smiled. We were never alone, were we? It was nearly dawn when Alejandro opened the black case. The yurt was still. Nora, Lena, and Ash were inside, the hearth barely flickering. Cale sat by the door, alert. He hadn't slept in days. Alejandro unlatched the final clip. Inside were matte black VR glasses, initials NV etched on the inner rim. Nathan Vance's prototype. You're using the code? Lena asked softly. Only once, Alejandro replied. And only if he's ready. Nora met Cale's gaze. He's always ready. No, Alejandro said quietly. He's always watching. That's not the same. This wasn't about brute force. The memory they sought had to be lived. Alejandro placed the glasses over Cale's eyes. The dog tensed, then stilled. A soft blue pulse flickered inside the lenses. Backtrack Vance, Alejandro said. Cale jolted, then stood, his eyes unfocused, seeing something beyond the room. Without hesitation, he turned and walked out into the brittle morning. They followed him west, past the frost-tipped ravine toward Grief Hollow. Cale moved with purpose. Ash limped behind, refusing to be left out. In a mossy clearing, Kyle stopped. He sniffed, then dug slow, precise. 10 minutes later, his paw struck metal. Alejandro unearthed an ammo box. Inside, a cloth-wrapped memory card labeled in Nathan's handwriting. Failsafe, final hour. Back at the comms tent, they played the video. Nathan appeared on-screen tired, bleeding, speaking into the lens. If you're watching this, it means Cale brought you here. Project Echo wasn't just dogs. Lena gasped. They made us believe obedience had to come from pain. But Cale chose love. He paused. If Nora sees this, tell her I wasn't afraid. Just sorry. I loved you. Then Kay Lunskered and Young nudged his leg. Nathan smiled faintly. Backtrack, boy. Static. Silence fell like grief. Outside, Nora stood alone under a tree. Her hand shook against the bark. Cale approached quietly, pressed his head into her leg. I didn't get to say goodbye, she whispered. Cale didn't move, just stayed, solid, steady. Later, Alejandro loaded the second file. No one spoke. The screen lit up. Nathan adjusting Cale's harness in a cold room. Gray entered smug, calculated. You're still trusting that thing? He saved my life more than you ever have, Nathan replied. Gray circled closer. Orders changed. You'll be using a new model. We've trained 6 months, Nathan protested. Too ready, Gray said. We need obedience under chaos. He stepped forward, hand brushing Cale's strap. Alejandro paused the video, zoomed in. There, he said. A small, unfamiliar chip beneath Gray's thumb. Detonation tag, Alejandro confirmed. Signal-based. Lena paled. He wired the harness? Nora's voice cut in, firm. With both of them still wearing it. Back on the screen, Nathan's face changed. You wired his harness? Gray smirked. He's not a partner. He's a product. Nathan trembled with fury. He's not your dog. Gray leaned in. No, Vance. He's your leash. The camera flickered. A second angle caught Gray exiting. No concern. Just certainty. Nathan remained holding the harness like it might break. Cale licked his hand once. Nathan broke down, whispering into Cale's fur. I'll get you out, buddy. I promise. The tent was silent. Lena stared at the screen. What kind of person wires a dog's harness to explode? Kyle stepped forward and pressed his head against the screen. Gray's face frozen mid-reach. Not growling, just watching. Later that night, Nora stood by Alejandro, who was copying the files. Is it enough? She asked. It's everything, he said. Command violations, tampering, attempted murder. Nora looked to Cale. You knew. Cal's eyes met hers quiet, solemn, not vengeance, memory. Then came the morning. Cale stood beneath the rusted bell. Still, waiting. The sound of tires cracked the silence. 2 SUVs, civilian-styled but militarized. Alejandro locked the door. Eyes up, he muttered. They're early. Outside, Gray's men wore fish and wildlife uniforms. But Gray made no pretense. Cale moved before anyone, a blur through the trees. Alejandro followed, whispering into his radio. Overhead, an FBI drone watched, unmarked. Gray stepped out, cold and calm. I'm here on federal business, he said. Dangerous dog on the loose. Alejandro didn't blink. You came to kill the story. Gray smiled thinly. Number I came to kill the storytellers. His hand dipped into his coat. Cale lunged. The gun fired into the sky, useless. Cale knocked Gray down but didn't bite. Just pinned him. 2 paws to the chest. Eyes inches away. A silent judgment. Alejandro looked skyward. Confirm visual. That's Kyle. No muzzle. No kill. Confirmed, came the reply. We've got it. Cale stepped back. Gray looked stunned. You should have killed me, he rasped. Cale tilted his head, then walked away. Lena rushed out, Ash at her heels. She threw her arms around Cale. You held back, she whispered. Cale leaned into her. Behind them, black-clad agents emerged from the woods. You're under arrest, one said. Obstruction, attempted murder, unauthorized experimentation. Gray sneered. They'll bury this. Not this time, the agent said. We have a live feed. Alejandro stepped forward. We have the dog you tried to turn into a weapon. He just saved my life without violence. He turned to Gray. What does that make you? Gray didn't answer. Because some defeats don't come from being beaten. They come from being seen. Cale had judged him. Quietly. Completely. Not with rage. Not with hate. With truth. And truth doesn't bark. It stands. Sirens were never meant for forests. Their wail should have echoed off brick and steel, ricocheted along city canyons and glass towers. Yet, as dawn burned soft gold across Timberfall, the high-pitched cry threaded through the pines, slicing birdsong in two. Red and blue strobes splashed color against cedar trunks, painting the snow in frantic pulses of law and consequence. Lena stood on the cabin porch, Ash tucked beneath her arm like a living heartbeat, Cale planted at her side. She felt the vibration of engines before she saw them. 4 Bureau SUVs barreling up the narrow service road, tires spitting sleet. Behind them, 2 vans carrying evidence teams, satellite dishes bristling like porcupine quills. Nora stepped out, rifle lowered, relief and fatigue etched into every line of her face. She didn't speak, just placed a steady hand on Lena's shoulder as the first agents poured into the clearing. "Federal Bureau of Investigation?" A woman's voice boomed, crisp and practiced. "Hands where we can see them!" Gray was already cuffed, wrists locked behind his back, Cale's muddy paw print still visible on his chest. 2 agents marched him forward. His suit coat was torn where Cale had pinned him. His composure was not. He smirked, eyes flicking to Lena, to Cale, to Ash, as if cataloging their faces for some future reckoning that would never come. Alejandro handed over the memory drives, chain of custody forms signed in triplicate. Raw footage, trial data, off-books funding ledgers. Enough to light Capitol Hill on fire for a year. The lead agent, Special Agent Ruiz Diaz, nodded grimly. "And the program itself?" "Shut down," Alejandro said. "Every back-channel lab flagged, every Shell LLC frozen. Cerberus is over." Gray laughed, low and ugly. "Cerberus is an idea. Ideas don't die." Ruiz Diaz stared him down. "They do when no one will fund the coffin." She turned to her team. "Read him his rights." An agent began the litany right to remain silent, right to an attorney, but the words felt small against the vastness of the forest. Gray listened, lips curled, but his eyes darted to Cale one last time. Cale didn't snarl. He didn't flinch. He simply watched calm, steady, until Gray finally looked away. Judgment delivered without a sound. The evidence techs moved quickly, photographing blast charges Ash had prevented, tagging the broken sound lure Lena had disarmed, bagging the rigged harness Gray had wired for death. Each artifact told a sliver of the story. Together they roared. Timberfall elders emerged from between the trees, silent witnesses in woven shawls. They offered no celebration, only nods of acknowledgement. Justice was not a victory dance. It was a breath finally released. Ash squirmed, pawing at Lena's jacket, and she set him on the snow. He limped forward, nose twitching at the line of federal boots. One agent knelt, hand out. Ash sniffed, then trotted back to Lena, tail giving a single wag as if to say, "Enough strangers for one lifetime." Ruiz Diaz approached Nora. "We'll need full statements. You, Mr. Cardoza, the girl." "She's a minor," Nora interrupted gently, pulling Lena close. "You'll get her statement with counsel present, not before." Ruiz Diaz softened. "Understood. We can process on-site or in Jackson tomorrow." Nora glanced at the sky, pale, wide, mercifully quiet now. "Tomorrow. Tonight my daughter sleeps without walls shaking." The agent nodded and strode off. Gray was led toward the SUVs. Snow crunched beneath polished shoes. Halfway there he paused, turned back. "Vance!" he barked. For a heartbeat, Nora thought he meant her, then realized he was staring at KL. "You'll be a museum piece," he sneered. "A cautionary tale behind glass." Cale tilted his head. Then, with slow deliberation, he lifted a paw and pressed it into the fresh snow, leaving a perfect print, as if signing his own story, as if saying, "Put glass around memories all you want. They still bite." Gray's face twitched. The agents nudged him on. The last vehicle door slammed. Engines growled. Tires cut twin paths out of the clearing. Sirens faded down the valley, swallowed by distance. Silence rushed in. Nora knelt, arms wrapping around Lena from behind, chin resting atop her red tangled hair. For the first time since Nathan's death, she allowed herself to feel the shape of relief, jagged, unfamiliar, but real. Lena's shoulders shook once. Nora tightened her grip. "It's over," she whispered. Lena turned, eyes shining. "Dad would have liked the ending." Nora Laffetta, sound, half sob, half sunlight. "He might have written it bigger." But yes, he'd approve. Cale stepped closer, pressing against them both. Ash wormed his way into the embrace, tail thumping softly. A four-part knot of breath and fur and healing. The forest exhaled with them. Down by the river, Elder Elia rang the rusted bell once. Its tone drifted across Timberfall, not as an alarm this time, but a benediction. The danger has passed. Let the living remember the dead and move forward. Snow continued to fall, light as memory, cleansing the tracks of violence. Somewhere beyond the ridge, a lone wolf answered the bell with a howl, neither mournful nor triumphant, simply resolute. Inside the cabin, fire crackled again. Dylan poured coffee into tin mugs, hands finally steady. Alejandro sat at the table, writing a list: labs to shutter, whistleblowers to protect, futures to rebuild. Nora watched him, then looked at Cale, curled by the hearth. Ash snuggled into the crook of the bigger dog's belly. "We keep them together," she said softly. Alejandro nodded. "Pack of 3. Pack of 5, Lena corrected, squeezing her mother's hand. Nora smiled. 5. Outside, dawn unfurled fully pale gold across untouched snow, lighting prints that led not away from danger but deeper into sanctuary. For the first time, they could follow them without fear. And somewhere, Nathan Vance's promise echoed in the new light. Love is loyalty chosen, not commanded. Cerberus was dead. The family it tried to break was very much alive. Spring reached Timberfall the way forgiveness reaches an old wound, slow, patient, unstoppable. Ice loosened its grip on the river. Pines shook out their winter hush, and the forest floor woke beneath carpets of moss and trillium. Where sirens had once carved terror through the trees, birdsong now threaded the air like bright ribbon. At the edge of the clearing stood a building neither entirely new nor wholly old. Rough-hewn logs from the original cabin framed expanded glass walls. Solar panels glittered on a fresh-laid roof of cedar shingles. Inside, steel tables and touchscreen monitors coexisted with handmade dream catchers and shelves of field journals. A carved sign over the front deck read, "The Vance Center for Ethical Canine Development. Understanding through trust, not fear." Lena traced the lettering with her fingertips, wood still smelling of sap. She exhaled slowly, letting the moment settle. 6 months ago, this place was smoke and gunpowder, and memories too heavy to hold. Now it buzzed with quiet purpose researchers cataloging scent-mapping games, trainers designing fear-free response drills, tribal elders teaching the old songs that once guided wolves away from human traps. Inside the main hall, Ash bounded in wide arcs, body sleek with new muscle, coat patched where scar tissue had grown over bullet grazes and sedative burns. He carried a braided rope toy in his jaws, tail helicoptering. Half wild, half domestic, wholly alive. KL watched from a sun-striped corner, tongue lolling, the wise elder content to let the youngster parade. But when Ash skidded near an occupied desk, KL rose endeavor. The mentor steered him gently back toward the open mat. A single chuff. Play here, not there. Ash obeyed with a happy yip. Nora stood beside a glass board covered in color-coded diagrams. Enrichment rotation, positive recall loop, stress signal index. Her hair was tied back, a pencil tucked behind one ear. She looked every inch the scientist she'd trained to be, yet her eyes carried something warmer, softer. She noticed Cale's subtle correction, smiled. Self-regulating pair bond, she murmured, jotting a note. Alejandro stepped from the adjacent clinic bay, wiping antiseptic from his palms. Pup's heartbeat's strong. No arrhythmia, he reported. He'll be cleared for the demonstration tomorrow. Good, Nora said. I want donors to see what choice-based training looks like in real time. She tapped the board. No shock collars, no compliance, drugs, just trust and reinforcement. Alejandro chuckled. Radical concept, I know. Across the hall, Elder Elia finished hanging a deerskin panel etched with paw prints and constellations gift from the council. He nodded to Lena. May the young ones walk between worlds without losing either, he said. Lena returned the nod, then hurried to the outdoor run where volunteers were setting up agility hoops carved from willow. She whistled a low, two-note, trillin' old recall cue Nathan once taught her. Ash's head snapped up. He bolted through the open doors, rope toy trailing like a comet tail. Kay loped after, slower but steady. Outside, the meadow shimmered with new grass. A small crowd gathered, students from the State University's anthrozoology program, local ranchers once skeptical of wolf dogs, even a pair of FBI liaisons assigned to monitor the center's progress after the Cerberus shutdown. No weapons, no tension, just curiosity. Lena unclipped Ash's lead. "You ready, Scout?" He barked short, confident. She pointed to the first hoop. "Through!" Ash sprinted, leapt clean, landed with a grin only dogs can manage. Applause rippled. Lena guided him toward a scent box, tapping the lid. "Find it," Ash sniffed, pawed, sat tail pumping on the target box. Reward: a slice of venison jerky and the delighted gasp of a child in the front row. Cale joined, completing his own slower circuit nose touching stations, demonstrating calm holds while Lena walked a full circle around him. Elder Elia narrated, "Watch the ears neutral, forward, mouth soft. Choice, not command." A rancher in a weathered hat folded his arms, begrudging smile on his face. "Never thought I'd see a shepherd and a wolf mix teaching us manners." Behind him, the FBI liaison whispered to Nora, "If Cerberus had started like this, we wouldn't be cleaning up its mess." Nora's gaze tracked Lena, and the dogs a triad of motion and trust. "No," she said softly. "But then we wouldn't have learned how strong love can be after fear." As the demo ended, Lena knelt, arms wide. Ash barreled into her, Cale close behind, the three forming a tangle of laughter, fur, and sunlit dust. Cameras flashed. Investors murmured excitedly. But Lena heard none of it. In that moment, she was 7 again, her father's laugh echoing through the pines, promising that wolves and humans could share more than just territory. They could share heart. The crowd dispersed for lunch, leaving the meadow quiet save for breeze and distant river song. Nora approached Lena, slipped an arm around her shoulders. He'd be proud. Lena leaned her head against her mother. "We're not done." "Not even close," Nora agreed. Alejandro joined them, holding a small wooden box. "Found this in the old shed foundation," he said, handing it to Lena. She opened it carefully. Inside, Nathan's leather bracelet mended where it had frayed and a note. "For Lena. Keep listening. The dogs will tell you when the world forgets how." Tears blurred her vision, but she smiled. "I will, Dad." She slid the bracelet onto her wrist, the leather warm from sunlight. Cale nosed her hand as if sealing a promise. Ash mirrored him, tiny muzzle pressing the same spot. A drone camera buzzed overhead, capturing the moment for the center's inaugural documentary. A girl with 2 dog-sewn scarred guardian. One rising scout standing in a meadow where fear once reigned. The future padded toward them on 4 paws, and for the first time, they felt ready to meet it. Dusk brushed the valley in watercolor hues lavender, pooling over the ridges, amber sinking behind the pines. Strings of soft lanterns arched from cedar to cedar, their glow spiraling up like captured fireflies. Folding chairs formed a half-moon on the new meadow stage, every seat filled. Students in forest, service greens, rangers in pressed uniforms, researchers clutching tablets, and townspeople who had once whispered, "Wolf dog," with fear but now said it with something closer to pride. At center stage stood Lena Vance, 7 years old, copper hair braided with a single red ribbon. Her boots barely reached the floorboards, but her voice, when she began, carried well past the last row. "Thank you for coming to the opening of the Vance Center's summer program," she said, small hands gripping the wooden lectern. "My dad believes stories change more hearts than rules ever could. So tonight, I want to tell you Cale's story, because without it, none of us would be here." Murmurs hushed. A hush deeper than courtesy curiosity, reverence. Behind Lena, an enormous photograph stretched across a greenhouse poly screen. Cale and Ash, side by side in the training yard, sunlit fur against emerald grass. Ash lay there now at the foot of the stage, chin on paws, tail thumping each time Lena's voice warmed. Cale waited at the edge of the clearing, his silhouette cut sharp against the glowing horizon. Optingas always for quiet vigilance over spotlight. Lena drew a breath. Cale wasn't just a dog, she said. He remembered. He chose. She recounted the night Cale carried a bleeding pup to her porch, bowed his head to a child's trembling hands. The months of running, the safe house fire, the moment he pinned a gunman but never bit. Each memory landed gentle but unflinching truth polished by grief, not dulled. Nora watched from the front row, Alejandro at her side. Their eyes shone, not from tears alone, but from recognition. The torch passing. Some people trained Kale with fear. Lena continued, voice steady. But fear never owned him. Love did. That's why he spared the man who hurt him, because he wanted the world to see the difference. Silence followed, heavy with understanding. Ranger Marcus, once skeptical, wiped at his brow. A student scribbled notes through watery eyes. Elder Elia closed his lips, moving in a silent blessing. Lena lifted the bracelet on her wrist, Nathan's leather. Now burnished by time and Soylent held it up, so lantern light kissed the initials. My dad said if you listen long enough, dogs will tell you the truth people forget. Kale told us. Ash tells us. And now this center will listen every single day. She stepped back. Applause rose like rain on a tin roof soft at first, then swelling. Ash sprang up, barking twice, as if clapping in borrowed language. Laughter rippled through the crowd. Nora climbed the stage, hugged her daughter, then faced the assembly. Tomorrow morning, the first cohort of ethical K-9 interns begins. You'll study scent therapy for PTSD, livestock guardian bonding, search and rescue without dominance training. But tonight, we'll close like the forest does by giving the last word to the wild. She nodded to Lena. Lena turned toward the tree line. Lanterns flickered. Shadows deepened. Ash, she whispered. The young wolf dog lifted his head to the darkening sky. For a heartbeat, he looked unsure, half-wild throat, struggling to find the shape of something older than commands. Then, eyes on Lena, he opened his mouth. The howl started small a cracked note, like a violin tuning in fog butt. It climbed, smoothed, blossomed into a ribbon of sound, so pure it stole the crowd's breath. It echoed off stone and timber, threading through lantern light, plunging into the valley where night had begun pooling. Students gasped. Rangers froze. Somewhere in the second row, a professor's hand flew to her chest. And then from farther up the ridge another voice answered, deeper, rough-edged, scarred by time. Kale. His howl wove around Ash's like braid and twined two notes. One elder, one new. Instinct and inheritance. Pain and promise. The valley caught the duet, flung it back brighter. Owls hushed, crickets stilled. Even the river seemed to pause to listen. Lena closed her eyes, tears sliding unashamed. Nora rested a hand on her daughter's shoulder, head tilted to hear every nuance. For a moment, the years between loss and healing collapsed into this single chord father's dream, daughter's vow, two dogs' unbroken bond. As the echoes faded, Elder Elia rose. The forest has accepted the song, he said, voice carrying like wind through needles, which means the story continues. Lena stepped to the mic one last time, wiping her cheeks. Their story isn't over, she said, voice trembling but clear. It's only just begun. Applause erupted standing, thunderous, yet somehow hushed by wonder. Lanterns bobbed as people turned to watch Kale trotting down from the ridge, merging into the crowd, Ash racing to greet him. They butted heads, tails swishing a half-wild greeting, a wholly human exclamation point. Fireflies sparked above the meadow now, mirroring the lanterns. Someone began to hum the lullaby Nathan once sang. Others joined, voices uncertain but earnest. Night settled around them like a quilt sewn from gratitude stitched by hands, paws, and a music older than language. And in that night, a center stood bright where a cabin once smoldered, proving love can survive laboratories, bullets, and fear. It can even survive silence, because when words fall away, a howl will carry farther than any speech. Far beyond Timberfall, other forests heard it. Other hearts would follow, because a choice made in trust echoes, because a story told true never ends. When all the dust settles, what lingers most is love, the kind that travels on four paws, across miles of forest, straight into a human heart. German shepherds like Kale remind us that loyalty isn't obedience, it's choice. They choose to stand beside us in quiet kitchens, on winding trails, and in those fragile moments when we need comfort more than words. Our bond with them, fierce, tender, and utterly reciprocal, shows that healing can be as simple as a warm nose pressed into a trembling hand. If you'd like to deepen that bond with your own dog, I've treasured a little guide called Listening with Your Hands. It's more story than manual, full of gentle exercises that tune you into your dog's subtle language. No pressure, just something to leaf through with a mug of tea and a patient companion at your feet. Give it a look when the evening is quiet. Your dog will tell you the rest.